pushed the strange thought away, thinking he might have seen the expression on Brandine. "I just wish I could have done more," Lofen said quietly. He was so enamored by his father, and the men he worked with. It was so hard to see my sweet little boy around those big, burly Vikings so much. She sniffed derisively. But I had little say in the matter. Hiccup's frown deepened. "Why is that?" Lofen stiffened, the chair creaking beneath her. Her eyes had an alerted look to them suddenly, as if she'd said too much. She shook herself a heartbeat later and said, "His father wanted him to learn the trade." "What was his trade?" Again, she paused. Lofen had been nothing but honest with him, up until now. But maybe she had good reasons for being hesitant. Hiccup knew her husband had died when Brandine was a little boy, maybe the memory was still too hard to think about. "I'm sorry." "Never mind." Hiccup rubbed his face. He took a deep breath and sighed. It was extremely late and he'd better stop talking before he said something truly inconsiderate. "I should leave. I can continue my search another day." "Wait." Lofen met his eyes, stilling his movements. Her eyes were bright, determined. Stronger than they had been a minute ago, as if she'd come to a decision. "I need to tell you something. After what Brandine has done, I have decided that you deserve this. I will be on your side in this." Hiccup raised an eyebrow. "You already said you'd tell me if you heard from him." "Yes, but you don't know the whole truth about our past." Lofen's hands shook, but her gaze was steady. He settled back in his chair once again. "Are you talking about your husband?" Lofen shook her head. "He was never my husband. He was my owner." The words rattled in Hiccup's head as she gingerly pulled back the collar of her nightdress to reveal a brand. It was a simple circle with a P stamped in the middle. Hiccup's heart fell. She'd been a pleasure slave. She replaced the material and took a deep breath. "I have never told anyone this story, Hiccup. It is very sensitive information. I trust you will speak of it to no one unless absolutely necessary." The chief nodded his agreement, though he knew at least Astrid would hear the story. He told his wife everything. Lofen clasped her hands and began, "I never knew my parents. The story goes that my mother was young and unwed. Naturally, I was a shame on the family name and sold into slavery the day I was born. The midwife who birthed me was sold the same day, whether for my sake or because they wanted to hide the fact she'd been my mother's midwife. In any case, we were bought and placed on a ship of miscreants and slaves until they made port in Rune." Hiccup blinked in surprise. Grey the Gullfool was the current chief of Rune. So she was referring to his father, Garrett the Glum. "The chief wanted the midwife, so I went with her. She promised that she'd care for me and I wouldn't be any trouble. He must have shown her some mercy because he allowed her to keep me, though by all rights, he owned me as well." Lofen smiled tenderly. Her name was Elise. She was a beautiful woman, her skin darker than coffee. People looked at her like she was an alien, but to me, she was everything. She taught me everything and kept me out of trouble. I helped her clean the chief's home and if I was good, I played with his children. She had a beautiful singing voice, and long, strong arms. She laughed a little. I even remember her chopping firewood for the family one day because all the men were out. She never complained, and was the most precious person in my life." Hiccup knew why she paused her story. "What happened to her?" "A sickness swept through the village. Being a healer and midwife, she was sent throughout the village to tend to the people." Lofen shook her head. "She caught the sickness and it took her." "How old were you?" 12. He gave her a sympathetic smile. "I'm sorry." Lofen nodded. "But not before I got to say goodbye. I wore a mask so I wouldn't catch the sickness. She spoke to me quietly so no one else would hear. She told me the story of my parents. She knew nothing of my father, but she told me my mother's name, Camille. That was her last gift to me before she passed." She took a deep breath before continuing. "I remained with the chief and his family for quite some time. But eventually when I was less a girl, and more of a woman." She lowered her eyes. "I was no longer needed there. I begged them to let me stay, and even Grey, now chief of Rune, he even begged his father. Make no mistake, he was always a horrid boy, but we had grown up together. I'd never slipped up, surely I did not deserve this. But the payment was made and it couldn't be changed. So at 16 I was sent to Outcast Island with my new owners. Hiccup swallowed hard. The depravity of man truly knew no bounds. Those years are a blur. I am thankful that I don't remember most of it. Loffen said quietly. But I do remember the day that I met Brandine's father. I wish I could say he was like most of them, but he was boisterous and obnoxious. He stood out in a crowd. The first time he came to me, I hoped I'd never see him again. Loffen shrugged her eyebrows in distaste. But he kept coming back. He tried to get to know me. It was difficult for me because it seemed he honestly wanted to woo me, but that is not the nature of pleasure slaves. It isn't flirtation and courting, it's all pleasure. I didn't know what he wanted from me other than what I was trained to do, sad as it is. Our owners were horrible to us if we did anything but what we were trained to do. Loffen's lip curled with disgust. She shook off the awful memories. But then he decided that I was his favorite. He came to me on a cold, dreary day and held up a piece of paper in front of my face. "You're mine, sweetheart, you're coming home with me," he'd said. Loffen paused. To be fair, he wasn't ever cruel with me. He was a cruel man, but never with me. So I suppose maybe I was his favorite after all. But I left Outcast Island for a time and lived on Berserker Island. And within a year, I was pregnant. And how old were you by this point? Hiccup asked, afraid of the answer. 31. Hiccup raised his eyebrows. Forgive me, but how old are you? You don't look a day over 31 right now. Loffen laughed lightly. I turned 50 this year. Wow. You age very well, Miss Anderson. It's the tea. Loffen tapped her cup. Anyway, I had Brandine, my only son. And his father was so proud. He took that little boy everywhere he went on that island. But when he left, Brandine stayed with me. Brandine was 7 when his father died. And it pains me to say that it traumatized him. But, he wanted his son to be there. Be there? Was it a work accident or something? Hiccup asked. Loffen met his eyes. His death was no accident. Hiccup frowned. No. Loffen wrung her hands in front of her, that fear returning to her eyes. And no, it was very much intentional. And unfortunately, he instigated it. He was murdered in cold blood. Hiccup asked. Some would believe so. Well, what did he do? He tried to take a man's children. Well, I dare say trying to kidnap someone's kids warrants an attack. Hiccup smirked. Loffen's blue eyes stared at him, not sharing in his amusement. Why was that look so familiar? Brandine's eyes were not that blue, and besides, he had never looked at him so pleadingly before. He had a rivalry with this other man their entire lives. Loffen continued softly, not breaking her gaze. He could never best him in wits or battle. As they got older, he discovered just what it would take to bring his enemy to his knees. If he took his children away, he would win. Hiccup's smile slid from his face. And his own son was such a secret, in fact, his favored woman was such a mystery among his own men, his nemesis never had any way of knowing that he had a child of his own. He was so determined to win. He kidnapped the man's wife, though he lost that battle, he had a theory on how to end their rivalry once and for all. It became his obsession. He memorized every law and order he could get his hands on. He tried to take this man's children away, and the only loophole his nemesis could find was in a fight to the death. Hiccup stood abruptly in his seat, the wooden legs screeching in the quiet. Cold sweat covered his limbs. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be possible. All the things Brandine did, horrible as they are, it makes sense. Loffen implored. Giving you and Adriana a place to stay, befriending you, moving to Berk to have a relationship with your daughter. No. Hiccup turned away, heart racing. Doing everything he could to get close to you and your family. Loffen stressed. Even though he already knew the answer, she said the words he'd been dreading. I think Brandine did all the things he did because you killed his father. It couldn't be true. Hiccup shoved his hands into his hair, mind racing with memories. He racked his brain, searching for the flaws, trying to find a little boy in his memories. But there hadn't been one. He'd been too focused on saving his own children. And that blasted, psychotic man had known it. Then he remembered that horrible nightmare he'd had. He and Fishlegs had embarked on a harebrained mission in search of Finn. Hiccup had been so depressed and prepared to divorce Astrid over guilt. His family and village had been destroyed in that nightmare, all hope lost. Almost as if it had been a vision of what the future might have been if he hadn't won that duel. What was it Dager had said in the dream? Bracing a hand against the wall, Hiccup covered his mouth. He felt like he was going to be sick. In the dream, Dager had murdered Adriana, then threatened to go after Finn next if Astrid didn't cooperate. When Astrid cried out that he'd promised Finn would be heir, Dager had laughed and said, "Oh Astrid. Do you really think I need your son as my heir?" Hiccup turned back to Lofen as if in a trance. "It can't be true," he pleaded. Lofen's expression was sorrowful. "I'm sorry. Brandine is his father's son. He is as cunning as a fox and I." Her eyes brimmed with tears. "I am sorry for any part I may have played in deceiving you. I honestly thought he had forgiven you with the way he cared for Adriana." Turning away, Hiccup rested his forehead against the window pane. Toothless looked up from the shadows in concern. The chief of Berk closed his eyes and allowed the memories and the pain and the realization to wash over his soul. Brandine's father was Dager the Deranged. And Adriana was carrying his grandchild. Chapter 25, Game Plan. Chapter Text. Finn awoke to sunlight streaming through his bedroom window. With a long stretch he sat up and blinked into the sunlight. He frowned at his rather untidy room, wondering when he'd become so lazy. Checking his neck for the Fortis necklace to make sure it was still there, he hopped out of bed, grabbed a towel and headed for the washroom. 20 minutes later he returned to his room feeling clean and wearing fresh clothes. It took about 10 minutes to clean up his room, really. He hadn't taken his dirty clothes to the washroom in over a week, before he stopped in his tracks halfway down the stairs. His side wasn't hurting. Finn took a deep breath and exhaled. A slow smile crept onto his face. He couldn't believe that he actually wasn't feeling any pain. Not only that, he felt really good, like he'd finally woken up after countless weeks of exhaustion. It took all his willpower not to cheer with excitement. Adriana did not like being woken up early, and now that she was in her second trimester she needed all the sleep she could get. Dropping off his large load of laundry into the washroom, Finn trotted into the kitchen and nearly squeezed his mom to death in a bone-crushing hug. Astrid yelped when her feet left the ground. She chuckled and patted her son's back. "Good morning. What are you so happy about?" "Mom, I feel really good today." "Like?" He set her down and couldn't help the grin. "Like I could run a mile." Astrid smiled and patted his shoulders. "Great, Finn. You know what I'm going to say though. Don't overdo it, yup." Finn opened the icebox in search of food. "What's Dad doing today?" "HMPH. I can't say that I can answer that question," Astrid said, tossing her braid over her shoulder. "Why?" Finn asked, pulling out the juice. "What time did he get home last night?" Astrid gave him a level stare. "You're kidding me. He isn't back yet?" Finn asked, incredulous. "Nope. No warning, no note." Astrid huffed. "I really hate it when he does this." Finn winced. "Well, he hasn't made a habit out of it." "No, rather he'd better not fall back into old habits. He used to do this all the time when we were young." "Oh." Finn smiled a little while he cooked some eggs. "I always forget that Dad used to be a bit nomadic when he was younger." Astrid gave a derisive HMPH that made Finn bite back a laugh. In all seriousness though, it was strange that his dad had returned from Jet just to turn back around and leave again. Where had he gone? Why hadn't he at least told them before leaving again? Surely they wouldn't have cared so long as they knew where he was going. "If he's not back by dinner time then I'm going to go look for him." Finn faced his mother, who was pushing oatmeal around in her bowl distractedly. Her blue eyes were fixed on the window. "I'm sure he's fine, Toothless is with him. I'm not worried, I'm irritated." Finn hid another smile, she was totally worried. Her spoon dropped into the bowl with a clatter. There's no reason to hide anything from us. Hide? What would he be hiding? Astrid looked at him. Finn, where else would your father go without telling us? Their closest allies Braun, Bob Burglar Island, Berserker Island, and now Jet couldn't he be in trouble? Hiccup would have notified the entire council, which included Astrid. So that only left their less than friendly allies. Mainly, Rune and Outcast Island. And that meant. Finn stared at his mom. You don't think? Oh, I do think. Astrid muttered, looking back out the window. Your father is smart, but when he's exhausted, he thinks too much, and when he thinks too much, he makes less than smart decisions. Mainly stupid. Standing and dropping the remains of her breakfast in the trash, she began to wash the dishes. Finn finished his breakfast and helped her, which only took a few minutes. He nudged her with an elbow. I'm sure he's fine, he'll be back soon and then you can kick his butt. Astrid raised an eyebrow at her son. Usually I'd tell you to watch yourself, mister. Come on, I've heard the story. You used to keep him in line. A proud smile slipped onto her face. The only woman to ever do so, mind you. Finn laughed a little. He hadn't really thought about it before, but it was true. The only person the great dragon conqueror had ever answered to was his wife. You guys have been best friends for a long time. Finn marveled. Astrid dried the last dish and met his eye. Yes. Granted, I wasn't very kind to him for the first 15 years of our lives. Yeah, but for the last 20 years. Finn trailed off. He could feel his mom watching him, even as he thought. What are you thinking about? I don't know. Finn leaned against the counter. How did he put his sudden weird emotions into words? I guess it's something desirable to want something similar someday. If it's not weird to say to your mom. Astrid laughed. There's nothing weird about that telling me or wanting a strong relationship. It's been a while since you've dated anyone. Finn blew air past his lips. That's because I didn't deserve to date anyone. Heck, I probably never should have dated anyone to begin with. Maybe so, but you've learned a lot. How to act and especially how not to act. Yeah. Finn allowed a few memories to cross his mind before shoving them away. What is it? Astrid asked. Finn looked at his shoes. I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever be better than that. I don't want to screw up again. Finn, you have changed so much the last 2 years. Astrid replied. Your father and I are so proud of the young man you have become. I know it hasn't been easy and you still have your moments, but that's part of being human. Nobody is perfect, and the right girl won't expect you to be. Yeah, but it's a legitimate fear. Yes, it is. Astrid rested a hand on his arm. But I know that you'll do the right thing when the right girl comes along. It's good that you're sensitive about it. Just don't hold yourself to such a high standard so much that you aren't you. Finn gave her a wan smile. Yes, if I ever have the pleasure of meeting Miss Right. Oh, she's out there somewhere. Who knows, maybe you already know her. Astrid winked and marched to the doorway to grab her boots. I'm off to the academy, if I don't leave now I'll be late. What are you going to do this morning? I'm going to take a walk in the woods I think. I'll take Zap. Finn replied, pulling on his own boots. He stuck his hand out the door and winced at the morning chill. Wow. Cold weather is coming early. Don't be out too long and don't overdo it, I won't. Finn lightly rolled his eyes and followed his mom outside. Together they strolled into the barn where the dragons were nipping at each other or blowing smoke rings, as was Lily's case. Finn gave the nightmare a scratch on the nose as he walked by. He resolved to give the dragon a wash later, knowing she was probably bored without being able to fly with Adriana. Hey Zappy girl. Finn grinned as the shockjaw shoved her face over his shoulder and snuggled him close. She growled deep in her throat, making his insides shiver. He scratched her scales and winced when a few flaked beneath his nails. Yup, both of you ladies are getting baths today. Astrid nodded in agreement. They'll enjoy that. Maybe I'll bring Stormfly back in time for one later. You guys have a good day. See you, Mom. Finn waved as she and Stormfly took off out the door. He turned back to Zap and Lily. Who wants to take a walk? Both dragons danced with excitement and charged out the door, nearly knocking him over as they went. Finn was very glad he was feeling better. A mere week ago, if he'd been bumped around like that, he'd have been writhing on the floor in pain. With a little trepidation, Finn jogged after the dragons toward the trees. He was again surprised when he felt no pain in his side. He laughed and sped up a little to keep up with the tussling dragons, careful to stay clear of their barbed tails. He followed them for a while through the woods, pausing every few minutes to catch his breath. He was definitely out of shape. Thankfully the sun rose over the trees, chasing away the shadows. It didn't take long for the morning chill to disperse and soon he was taking off his jacket. When the dragons stopped to take a drink from a small pond, Finn lay down on a log with a sigh. The smell of pine needles and sap and dirt filled his nose and he sighed again, feeling the tension from the last few months recede. He'd forgotten how much he loved the woods. A shadow filled his vision and he opened his eyes in time to see Zap open her mouth. Water fell from her mouth onto his face and he recoiled, rolling off the log, hacking. He spit a slimy wad of water out of his mouth, refusing to gag. I really hate it when you do that. Finn grumbled, wiping his face off with his jacket. Zap chortled and pranced away. He still didn't know why she did it. His dad had assumed shockjaw parents brought water to their young via mouth to mouth. Finn had not been sure how to feel about that information, the fact that his dragon knew when he was thirsty or that she treated him like he was her youngling. Finn watched his dragon play with Lily, a little surprised the monstrous nightmare had complied so easily. Usually she got irritated with Zap and her antics. As he stood from the ground, a sharp pain lanced his side and he inhaled sharply. Two dragon heads swiveled toward him. Finn waited for the pain to subside before exhaling, testing the area with a hand. His side didn't hurt to touch, but inside he could feel the area warming up, like it had its own pulse. He sighed. That's my cue to go home, I guess. Come on, ladies. The dragons followed him closely, which he could tell was motherly instinct. It was strange to have dragons watching his every move as if they were waiting for something to happen. Thankfully they arrived at the house a short time later accident-free, and while he felt tired from his morning walk, it left him feeling energized. Lily growled excitedly and ran to the porch. Zap took to the air over the house as Finn turned the corner, finding Adriana sitting in one of the chairs. She scratched her dragon's nose affectionately and smiled at him in greeting. Hey! You went for a walk? Yeah. Finn sighed, taking the seat beside hers. I've actually felt really good today. Good. Adriana smiled again. Finn smiled back. You must be feeling good if you're this cheery. First night I didn't wake up halfway through the night. Well. Adriana paused, reconsidering. Okay, once because I had to pee. But I didn't wake up because I felt barfy or because I simply couldn't sleep. It's really obnoxious, you know. He closed his eyes as she prattled, shaking his head. He listened as she talked and talked and talked. After a while Finn didn't know what she was talking about, so he half listened to his sister and the terrible terrors growling at Zap as she flew in tight circles around the house. Finn opened his eyes to call her down when he saw a black shape in the sky heading towards them. Such a nuisance, and you know what he said. He said that mosquitoes and spiders are each good for the ecosystem. I mean, I suppose they are good for something or they wouldn't exist. Finn stood. Adriana. He vaguely heard her stop talking as he left the porch and stood in the front yard while his dad and Toothless came in for a slow landing. Adriana joined him in the grass, her green eyes wide. They didn't come back last night. She whispered hoarsely. Nope. Finn ushered her back as Toothless finally landed, kicking up a cloud of dust from his wings and legs. The Night Fury growled in exhaustion, his wings flopping to the ground on either side of him. Hiccup didn't look any better. In fact, he looked about ready to drop. But that wasn't what made Finn's heart rate pick up. It was the hollow, empty expression on his dad's face as he dismounted and began untying the saddlebags. Despite this, Finn didn't hold back his irritation. Where have you guys been? He demanded. Mom was up half the night worried. Hiccup didn't reply. In fact, he wasn't sure if his dad had even heard. Adriana put a hand on Finn's arm, probably to keep him quiet. She stepped closer. "Daddy. Are you okay?" Finn watched as his dad's movements became jerky. He stepped up and put a hand on the saddle. "Dad, I can take care of Toothless." Without responding, Hiccup turned and wrapped Adriana in a hug. She hugged him back but stared back at Finn with shock. He knew his expression wasn't much better. Something had happened. Hiccup pulled back and cupped Adriana's chin in his hand, brushing her cheek with his thumb. "I love you, Addie." "I know, Daddy. Tell me what's wrong, what happened? Where did you go?" Adriana asked. In a blink, his demeanor changed. Finn knew exactly what he was doing. He'd closed the door on his emotions to ignore their questions. He grabbed Toothless' saddle and bags and walked to the barn. "We'll talk in a little bit." Dropping his things off on the table, he watched Toothless crash in his pen full of hay. Finn thought the Night Fury must really be exhausted if he preferred hay over his lava stone inside the house. "Tell your mom I'm home. I'm going to bed." And with that, Hiccup turned and went inside the house. When the door snapped closed, Adriana whirled to Finn. "What in the world was that?" Finn shook his head. "I don't know. But it almost looked like he's seen a ghost." Adriana finished, looking back at the house with worry. "You have no idea where he went?" Biting his tongue, Finn shook his head. He had a theory, but he had no intention of sharing it with his sister. She didn't need the stress. And besides, Hiccup said they'd talk later. There was no use speculating when they'd find out soon enough. Finn sent a message to his mom via Terrible Terror that Hiccup was home. He traipsed through the village in search of Eric or Cliff, needing one of his bestest brothers to discuss the most recent goings-on of the Haddock household. He couldn't get his dad's strange behavior out of his head. If his hunch was correct, Hiccup should have returned with some sense of retribution. Instead he looked the exact opposite. What could have happened? It had been a long time since Finn had seen that empty look on his dad's face. When Finn had been nothing but a thorn in his parents' side 2 years ago, he'd caused his father some serious pain. Not even that could equate to this hopeless despair. No, the last time Finn had seen Hiccup this distressed was when his parents had almost divorced and the circumstances revolving around that horrible duel. Finn kicked a pebble across the street with a huff. It was almost high noon. His dad had only been home for about an hour. If he had any hope of getting answers to his questions, he probably would have to wait until after dinner. "Hey!" Inga suddenly appeared at his side, matching his gait. "Why the long face? It's almost harvest season." The thought did brighten his mood a little. He loved harvest season. "True, you'll be happy to know that I've felt really good today." "Oh good. So you'll be able to help with the harvest for sure?" Inga grinned. "Yup." Finn's smile tapered. Inga poked his arm. "Come on, don't be a crab apple." Finn huffed a laugh. "I am not a crab apple. You Haddocks always have something to be upset about." Indignation flared in his chest. She didn't know, so he needn't get upset. Taking a deep breath, Finn shoved his hands into his pockets and tried for a patient response. "It's been a rough year. It's been a rough life, I say." Inga nodded. "But alas, why wallow in self-pity when you can do something about it instead? What makes you the expert in the trials of life?" Finn countered. Inga raised an eyebrow. "Maybe not expert, but I've had my fair share of problems. Just because they're not your problem doesn't mean they're not important." "Yeah, I know," Finn sighed. "Though I could also say right back at you." She tossed her dark hair over her shoulder. "I'm not really succeeding in making you feel better, am I?" "Nope." "What exactly are you bent out of shape about exactly?" Finn halted in the middle of the street. "You know, maybe it's something serious and not a joke." Inga blinked up at him in surprise. "There's a lot going on in my family right now and my dad is acting weird. I'd appreciate it if you stopped with the brash comments for 2 minutes." Inga's blue eyes had narrowed to slits. "So what? You don't want to talk to me?" That's not what I said. Finn managed, despite his anger. I like talking to you about stuff, but sometimes you don't know when it's the right time for jokes. Oh, that's really fresh coming from you. Inga tossed her head. Considering you always have the most tasteless jokes. What is that even supposed to mean? Finn threw his hands up in the air. That has literally nothing to do with this conversation. Actually it does if you listen to more than just yourself. Inga snapped, marching away. Okay. So I guess we're not talking then. Finn yelled after her. Nope, I guess not. Inga sashayed away. Fine. Fine. Finn growled in irritation and stomped away, ignoring the few odd looks he was getting. He hadn't meant for things to get so out of hand, but was it too much to ask for her to just stop and listen? She'd come up to him after all, and if she wanted to know what was wrong, why didn't she take it seriously? Maybe it was old news that his family had a new tragic development, and maybe she didn't really want to hear it, but he'd wanted someone to talk to. Again, was that so much to ask? It was no secret that Inga liked him. He'd figured it out weeks ago, what with his staying at the healers and all. People had been teasing him about her for years, and for some reason, Finn was just on the fence. He liked Inga as a friend and wondered if they had the potential for something more. But he couldn't get past the fact that she was only 13. She didn't see the world like he did. He felt horrible for being so unsure about his feelings for her, and for being, as she put it, a crab apple all the time. Finn turned a look over his shoulder. Inga had long since disappeared. He chewed on his lip for a moment of indecisiveness. Ah, blast it. Turning on his heel, Finn sprinted through the streets after her. Confused feelings or no, she was his friend, and he didn't want to have any lingering animosity over something so petty. Ducking past a few carts, he saw Inga walking towards the healers. Before she even made it to the door, he caught up with her, though he was panting with the exertion. Inga's initial irritation disappeared. Breathe, Finn. You're going to. Finn held up a hand through his wheezing. Don't say it, please. Standing up straight, he finally caught his breath enough to say, I'm sorry. Inga blinked in surprise. You're right, I'm a crab apple. I don't try to be, I just get frustrated with everything that's going on. And I don't need to take it out on you. A slow smile crept across her face. No, you really don't. Finn felt a little disappointed, unsure what kind of response he'd hoped for. Why was it all so confusing? Inga shrugged. It's fine, I could cut back on the joking. Finn relaxed a little. Thanks. I have to go to work now, give my mom a break. Inga slipped past him. I'll see you later. Yeah, later. Finn watched her go inside and finally traipsed away from the building. Shoving his hands back into his pockets, he once again felt the day's anxieties building. On top of his father's strange behavior, now he had to try to figure out Inga too. Combine that with his sister's pregnancy hormones throwing her out of whack every day. Finn sighed. It was a wonder he hadn't gone insane yet. Cliff flattened his hair with his hands once again, grinning in triumph when it stayed. He opened his mouth to cheer when his curls regained their former volume with what he swore was an audible poof. This was absurd, of course. He didn't hear anything, but if his hair had to be so wild, then it might as well have a sound effect. This was his dilemma. How was he going to impress Mr. Brand and ask for permission to date Taryn if he couldn't even get his hair under control? Mismatched footsteps caught his attention before Eric leaned into the room. You ready? No. You look good, bro. Cliff looked down at his clothes. After some time searching through his closet, he'd finally found a pair of nice brown trousers. However, he'd had to find a shirt elsewhere. Finally his mom had lent him a nice blue shirt that had once belonged to his dad. The simple dyed wool was soft and warm. Combined with his jacket and boots, he hoped he looked more put together than he felt. He felt like he could see every wrinkle and stain, but Eric didn't lie. Maybe he didn't look half bad. Now if only his hair would cooperate. He slumped. I'm so not ready. Eric laughed and stepped into the room. He squeezed Cliff's shoulders, which surprisingly released a lot of tension in his muscles. It'll be fine. Clyde's not so bad once you get to know him. I feel ridiculous. Cliff muttered. He'd never cared before about appearances, but the Brands did. He had to look the part if he was to get a chance, but what if Clyde saw right through him and shot him down before he could even speak? Cliff, come on. Eric leaned against the desk, peering down at him. He'd be stupid not to give you a chance. If anyone in the village deserves it, it's you. Cliff's stomach dissolved into butterflies and he swallowed hard. I think I'm going to be sick. It'll be F. No really, what the heck am I doing? I don't know. Cliff stood and paced the room, shoving his hands through his mess of brown curls. He stared at Eric with wide eyes. There should be a book on wooing women and impressing their fathers. Eric looked like he was holding back a laugh. This isn't funny, Eric. His bro coughed, trying to regain composure. You're right, I'm sorry. This is a big deal. A very big deal. Super big deal. The small house was quiet for a moment. Cliff continued running his hands through his hair. What do I say? He asked meekly. Eric straightened and gently slapped Cliff's hands down from his hair. He straightened his jacket and looked him square in the eye. Tell him that you believe his daughter is very special. She deserves the world. And while you're not perfect, you're willing to do whatever it takes to prove yourself to him. Cliff gulped and nodded resolutely. Whatever it takes. Eric nodded. He pointed at Cliff for a moment as if to say wait and left the room. Cliff waited in curiosity before his friend returned a moment later with a bottle. I don't use this very often because it's expensive. Eric held it up. It had a small nozzle on the top. He sprayed it once on Cliff's jacket and smiled. There, now you smell good too. Cliff lifted his arm and gave a tentative sniff. It was a nice musky, woodsy scent. He raised an eyebrow. I don't think Mr. Brand is going to care what I smell like. Eric shrugged. It's all about impressions. Now let's go. Shoving Cliff by the shoulders, he frog-marched him outside. What? No. Cliff scrabbled for any furniture he could latch onto, which was most things since his reach was longer than Eric's. The blonde, despite his laughter, continued to shove and slapped Cliff's hands when he didn't release the couch. You are going and you are going right now. Eric finally shoved Cliff onto the porch. Their neighbors ignored their shenanigans, as usual. Cliff stared at him imploringly. I'm not ready. You are completely ready, Cliff, it's now or never. Eric crossed his arms. If you don't do it now you won't ever be ready. Besides, it's your own fault for setting yourself a time limit of 1 day. Huh? You told Taryn you'd talk to him today. Well yeah, but surely I didn't mean today. Eric grinned. So if not today, when? Cliff pulled on his face with a nervous hiss. Cliff, really, you'll feel better when it's over. Unless he kills me. He won't. It's going to be fine. Cliff stared up at his bestest bro hopefully. You wouldn't care to join me on my final walk, would you? Eric snorted. No. I've got stuff to do. But. No. Eric stepped down from the door. You are going to talk to Mr. Brand, you are going to do it right now, and you're not going to come back to this place until you have a date in the works. Cliff stared at him with ever wide eyes. Sounds good. Eric grinned, walking back up the porch. We can celebrate when you come back. But. Good luck. Eric turned and shut the door in his face. Eric had kicked him out. The injustice. The rudeness. How could his bro do this to him? After all he'd done to be there for him, and Eric couldn't just. Cliff took a long, deep breath. Okay. He glared at the front door, half hoping Eric would change his mind. His blonde bro did not return. He had more hope for pink snowflakes to fall than for Eric to coddle him further. Okay. Fine. Cliff yelled, earning a glare from his neighbor Marcy. He walked toward the village square, towards Taryn's house, towards his doom. I'll show that Larson boy a thing or two. I'll show him that I can do this, and this is no joke and no time for fun and games. What's he think, now that he's practically engaged, that this is just simple pickings for the rest of us? Finn won't even ask a girl out. Cliff rambled to himself the entire walk. This was obviously a result of stress, and all completely Eric's fault, of course. He screeched to a halt. Taryn's house loomed above him. Cliff wasn't the reader that Eric and Adriana were, but he'd done his fair share of reading storybooks in his Shire days. One of his favorite books had been about a haunted mansion with ghosts and ghouls and poltergeists and, well, at the moment, he'd rather face all the horrors inside that house than knock on the Brand's door. "Okay, Cliff. You got this," he muttered, taking several deep breaths. "You are smart. You are funny. You are adorable. You have got this. Yeah, you got this. I got this. Cliff. Cliff's blood ran cold. He had been so busy trying to encourage himself that he had failed to notice that the door was open and Clyde Brand was looking him right in the eye. It didn't help that his eyes were exactly the same shade of brown as his daughter's. "Hi," he squeaked, his voice cracking as if he were still going through puberty. He cleared his throat. Hello, Mr. Brand. To what do I owe the pleasure?" Clyde asked, though he certainly didn't look pleased. "Mr. Brand, I wanted to have a civil, adult discussion about your daughter, Taryn," Cliff said rather quickly. He had rehearsed several lines in front of the mirror and he had no idea why this one had popped into his head. Clyde stared at him for a moment, his expression unreadable. "She's not home right now. But please, come in. Come in." Cliff's mind was in a whirl. Maybe Clyde planned to tie him to a chair and chop him up into teeny tiny little pieces. Cliff shook himself and walked in, not eager to incur the wrath of Clyde so soon. The man was, after all, standing at the door and waiting for him to come inside. The door closed and Cliff surveyed the tidy house. It had a very warm, cozy feel to it. The colors of the curtains matched the towels and napkins, and Cliff blinked in surprise at the beautiful teacups sitting high up on a shelf. If anything were to happen to those, Mrs. Brand would. "Please, sit down." Cliff took the closest seat at the table. Clyde took the seat at the head of the table and watched him with a level expression. Cliff resisted the urge to fidget, drum his fingers against the table, or run his hands through his hair. He was always in constant motion. Being forced to sit still at any time was akin to being sent to bed without dinner before the sun had even set. Talk about torture. "I don't know what to think of you, Cliff Smedley." Clyde broke the silence, his deep voice calm. Cliff held eye contact and forced himself to hold still. "But the chief and your friends speak highly of you. Taryn seems to enjoy your company. Therefore, I will let you speak." Cliff's heart lurched. The chief had vouched for him. Mr. Brand had talked to his friends. He realized the house was growing quieter because Clyde was patiently waiting. He took a deep breath and pushed his fears aside. He was here and Mr. Brand was giving him a chance to at least speak. "First of all, Mr. Brand, I'm sorry about that one afternoon. I tend to make quick decisions without thinking. I should have known to ask your permission to spend time with Taryn. So, I'm sorry that my ignorance caused problems." Clyde nodded silently. Was he merely affirming Cliff's screw-up, or accepting his apology? Secondly, Cliff continued, his knee beginning to bob up and down beneath the table. "I hope Taryn isn't in trouble because of me. I'd never want her or her reputation to be tainted because I screwed up." "Her reputation?" Clyde asked. Heart in his throat, Cliff nodded. "Yes. How loyal she is to you and her mom. She's a family girl and wants to make you guys proud." Again, Clyde nodded. But. I think she agreed to go with me because she wanted to have a good time. Granted, both of us should have known better, Cliff added. But I don't think she did it to rebel against your authority. Even though she knows better and she chose otherwise, that's not rebellion. In some cases, I think it could be translated that way. Other kids it might, but not Taryn. Kids like you. Cliff cracked a smile. "I'm not rebellious, sir, I'm just free-spirited." "And you think that's good for Taryn?" Cliff subtly wiped his palms on his pants. "I think Taryn knows who she is, she has strong values and knows what is a waste of time and what is more productive." "Yes, she does." But where exactly do you fit into the picture? Well, I don't exactly know that yet, sir. Yet. Cliff gulped. He was so going to get the boot. Clyde certainly didn't look impressed. Son, I want you to tell me this honestly. Clyde leaned back with steepled fingers. What exactly are your intentions with my daughter? You seem like a good young man, but so was Brandine Anderson. Cliff flinched. That's not to say that I think you'd ever harm my daughter in such a vile way. Clyde added gently. But you must understand why I'm so bent on protecting her. Cliff nodded in agreement, despite his pounding heart. I'd never. Clyde took a deep breath. Then what is it about Taryn that has you so interested? Memories filled Cliff's mind in a blink. Showing her the little oasis, seeing the light in her eyes when experiencing new things, her uproarious laughter after she'd shoved him into the water. The pun games and showing up at his house late the night before because of all the people she wanted to adventure with. It was him, not that Clyde needed to know that bit. You really do like her, don't you? Clyde's voice interrupted his thoughts. Cliff found himself smiling. He blushed and looked down. A bit, sir. So? Clyde sounded a bit more amused than he had a minute ago. So Cliff told him. He told Mr. Brand all the things he thought about Taryn. It felt a little strange at first, but Cliff found that he was less afraid the more he spoke. Clyde wanted to hear the truth and, despite his rambling, Cliff spoke best when he was honest. Taryn was beautiful and kind, she worked hard, perhaps a little too hard, and when it came down to it, she needed more fun in her life. She had a hilarious laugh and her pun game was strong. She was confident and outspoken and everything perfect that he wasn't. I don't say this at all to sound like I need her to fulfill anything for me, like fill my empty spaces or parts of my personality that are lacking, but the way Taryn interacts with me feels like more than just a simple friendship. It's not like Inga Jorgensen or Helga Ingerman, or even Adriana, who's more like my sister. I obviously don't know the future or what's best for Taryn, that's ultimately for you to decide. But I do care about her as my friend, and I respect her a lot. And Cliff paused, looking down at the table. I know I'm not the traditional guy that you might want. I talk too much and I'm constantly running around doing something. But what better girl to get me back in line than Taryn? Clyde chuckled, seemingly in agreement. Cliff sighed. I could go on, sir, but I could probably talk until your ears bleed. Well, we can't have that. Cliff blinked. Did Mr. Brand just make a joke? All right, Cliff. Clyde sat forward, hands folded. He watched the teenager for what felt like eons. Cliff waited with bated breath to hear the fated words, "You're out of here. I want her home by 9 p.m. sharp." Cliff's heart lurched. I want you two to be in public places until I give permission to go elsewhere. No leaving Burke. I want to know where she is. Cliff nodded vehemently, his curls bobbing. Yes. Yes. Of course. I'll totally keep you informed. And Clyde raised a finger, silencing the teenager. You may come over at any time. Joy exploded through Cliff's chest so hard that he thought he might explode. Or pass out, or throw up. Female chatter sounded outside the door before it opened to reveal Mrs. Brand, Taryn, and Alton. The ladies' arms were full of vases and flowers as they spoke to Alton. The trio paused, Taryn's eyes wide in fear. Hi. Cliff grinned. Mrs. Brand raised a brow at her husband. Hello, Cliff. Clyde stood and clapped Cliff on the shoulder. Taryn, he said with a smile, taking the flowers from her arms. I do believe you have some catching up to do with Mr. Smedley. Alton was grinning as widely as Cliff, who stood and pushed his chair back in. Taryn looked utterly confused. What? Clyde kissed her forehead. Have fun with your new boyfriend. Cliff wanted to melt at the shocked, surprised and utterly happy look on Taryn's face. Or Daddy. She hugged him tightly and kissed him on the cheek. Thank you. Clyde smiled widely and followed Mrs. Brand to the kitchen, who was also smiling widely. It is about time. Alton cheered. Cliff had no words. Taryn had already turned to him and given him a dazzling smile. He couldn't believe his luck. How was this even possible? He'd thought he was dead meat. Let's have an adventure, Mr. Smedley, Taryn said knowingly. Cliff never thought he would almost die at 17, but he nearly did that day. He nearly did. Discouraged as they were by their dad's behavior, the twins ended up having a productive day. Finn gathered some supplies at the nearest dragon wash and together with his sister, gave Lily and Zap a much-needed bath. Of course, the kids got more wet than the dragons, with Lily's heated skin evaporating the water and Zap's constant shaking. They were soon joined by Eric and Cliff, the latter regaling them with his tale of bravery. When he said Clyde Brand had given him and Taryn permission to date, the Haddocks cheered. Even Zap gave a mighty splash in the tub, though Finn suspected she was merely growing bored with all the chatter. After a few hours drying in the sun, the Haddocks grabbed their things to return home. The afternoon had dwindled into dusk, and while they had yet to eat dinner, they were eager to get home and figure out what was wrong with their dad. They didn't share their concerns with their friends, even though Eric followed. Cliff bid them good night, saying he was meeting Taryn at the Great Hall. They wished him luck, snickering at his awkward blushing, and marched to the Haddocks' home. Their conversation and laughter dissipated when they stepped into the house and found it to be different than before. Finn noticed the change first. All the doors and windows had brand new locks, and the distinct smell of pine filled the house. Astrid was sweeping wood shavings off the floor. It took Finn another minute to realize there was brand new window trimming, especially on the window beside the door. A dragon attack a few years ago had damaged the wood, but they'd never replaced it. Now it seemed that instead of sleeping most of the day like he probably should have been, his dad had made some serious upgrades to the house. Hiccup was sitting at the table, writing in a journal with a pensive expression. He looked up when they walked in and slapped his notebook shut. Good, you're both home. Where is Eric? Adriana paused in taking off her boots, using Finn's shoulder to keep her balance. He's putting Lily and Zap away for us. Good. Hiccup slid his things off to the far corner of the table. I need him here for this conversation. Astrid wordlessly sat down beside him. She crossed her arms against her chest and stared at the table. Finn wondered if she already knew the story or if her agitation was due to being kept in the dark. Adriana sat in one of the empty chairs just as Eric stepped inside. His easygoing smile dropped the second he saw Hiccup, who nodded at the remaining two chairs. Sit down, guys. Eric took the seat beside Adriana while Finn sat on the end opposite of Hiccup. The house was quiet for several minutes. Finn's shoulders were drawn tight like a pulled bowstring. Adriana rested her hands on her belly while she waited, though she gnawed on her lip nervously. Hiccup finally broke the silence. First off, everything in Jet went well. It was my plan to come home afterwards. But I decided, looking for Brandine was a better idea. Eric took Adriana's hand. It took a moment for her to find her voice. And I didn't find him. Hiccup murmured, eyes downcast. Okay, so what happened then? Finn demanded. I spoke with Loffen most of the night. Finn grimaced. Does she know where he is? No, but she thought he could be on Berserker Island. Hiccup sniffed derisively. It would certainly make sense. Why does it even matter? Adriana asked. I wanted to let this all go. I thought we had. Hiccup finally met her eyes. Why reopen old wounds? Hiccup swallowed. I know. I did for a long time and, last night I couldn't. He scowled at the table. Now I'm glad I went looking. Otherwise we'd still be clueless. Clueless to what? Finn asked. Just what exactly Brandine is. And how much of a fool I've been. Astrid reached out and held Hiccup's arm in comfort. So apparently she did know. Hiccup crossed his arms against the table and took a moment to look each of them in the eye. I can't hide this from you three. I can't. He paused, perhaps a bit fearfully. I can't protect you from this. But you each have to understand the magnitude of what I'm about to tell you. It's important that this information does not leave this house. No one can know about it, at least not yet. Not even Cliff. This he directed at Eric, who frowned in confusion but nodded. Finn and Adriana slowly nodded in turn when Hiccup met their eyes. Brandine is heir to the Berserker tribe. Hiccup said. His father was Dager the Deranged. Silence took over the house for nearly a minute before Finn burst out laughing. The others looked over at him in shock. His shoulders shaking, he leaned back in his chair and rubbed his face. Right. Hiccup stared back at him sternly. You can't be serious. Finn dropped his hands. Dager died without producing any heirs. He wasn't even married. Marriage has nothing to do with it, Astrid replied stiffly. And nobody knew about Brandine's existence. Hiccup added. They practically kept him under lock and key. But Finn broke off with another laugh, this time less amused. This is ridiculous. How do we know that's true? Loffen told you, did she? How do we know she's not lying? Why would she make up something so preposterous? Finn asked cynically. She wouldn't. Eric finally spoke. His teal eyes were focused on the wall as he thought. What would she have to gain by something so huge? What if it's just a claim? Finn interjected. She can't prove his birth and Brandine's dad is dead, or at least we all assumed he's dead. Maybe he's a deadbeat who took off when he was little, and she's a poor single woman who wants to make it rich. And besides that, Sven is the chief of Berserker Island now. When you won the duel, Berserker Island was yours by right. But you chose a new successor instead. Nobody can just barge in and make proclamations of being royalty if there's no proof. They've kept it a secret this long, they'd have to have proof. Astrid countered. Yes, but we don't know that. This is all speculation based on a lonely woman's rambling to freak Dad out. Loffen has nothing to gain by lying to me, Finn. Hiccup replied sharply. She has nothing but her freedom. The word struck Finn dumb. For a few seconds he only stared. Eric blinked out of his reverie, seemingly confused by the word choice. Loffen was a pleasure slave. Her mother was forced to give her up at birth and she has known very little kindness all her life. Hiccup explained calmly. Eric glanced at Adriana, who'd been quiet this entire time. Dager bought her and they had Brandine a time later. He was 7 when Dager and I dueled. Hiccup sighed, running a hand down his face. In fact, she said he was present for the duel. He watched? Eric asked incredulously. Hiccup nodded. He watched as I killed his dad. Finn was still shaking his head. That doesn't explain the last 3 years. Heck, the last 4 years. He offered you and Anna a place to stay and rescued you both when you fell into the frozen river. He moved out here and stayed here for this long. What's the point? Did he try to forgive you so he could have peace and then? Adriana suddenly lurched from her chair and leaned into Finn's face. Brandine doesn't want peace, Finn. There's nothing peaceful about a scumbag who attacks his girlfriend's friends, threatens their safety, and proceeds to rape her. Finn leaned back in his seat with wide eyes. Okay. You're right, sorry. Eric rested a gentle hand on her waist but she stepped away, wrapping her arms around her chest. She paced the living room. Hiccup stood but she whirled around. This was his plan the entire time, wasn't it? I don't know, Addy. Hiccup murmured. I'm sure the baby wasn't part of his plan, assuming he had one. Astrid replied. That would explain why he took off. Except he didn't know about the baby when he took off. And besides, Finn has a point. Eric said. Why go through all this trouble? By all rights he should want nothing to do with Hiccup. Unless it's all a revenge play. Hiccup finished. Addy, did Brandine ever tell you anything about his dad? Adriana sighed. He told me a long time ago that his dad was a good man. He'd had a disagreement with another man and they fought, the man killed his dad. She curled her lip in disgust. He said his dad's name was Dirk the Daring. It was all a cover. Finn whispered in shock. Eric shook his head. I always knew he was messed up but, it makes so much sense now. Everything he did, alienating Annie from the group, poisoning Cliff to keep her in line, nearly choking me to death. All his violent tendencies. How did we not see it sooner? How did we not see it sooner? Hiccup gestured to himself and Astrid. We're the ones who should have noticed. Finn huffed, slumping in his seat. So what? Brandine wanted to get back at you by having a fake relationship with all of us, especially Anna. Explained Agur. Adriana demanded, arms still crossed tight across her chest. What was he like exactly? It's in the name, deranged. Hiccup took his seat once more. He was resilient, I'll give him that. He was loud, arrogant, controlling, a bit unhinged. Smart in the sense that he could always come up with a plan, but not smart enough to realize the flaws. Astrid nodded in agreement. His execution was always off. He became a bit predictable. Hiccup frowned. Honestly, I don't know how he pulled this off. What if someone else came up with the plan? Eric mused. Was there anyone he trusted? Hiccup and Astrid both made faces. Not really. Savage? Finn asked. No, too unpredictable. If the man was deranged, why would unpredictable be a bad thing? Dago was psychotic, but he wasn't insane. He wanted people to obey orders. Anyone who thought for themselves didn't make a good minion. Astrid explained. And Savage is one such man. Savage isn't the issue. Hiccup folded his arms. Lofn told me that Brandine likes to be the smartest in the room. Well, I can see how he's just like his old man. Dago wanted to beat me but he never could, he wasn't smart enough. So he had a kid and trained him to be smarter than you. Finn raised a single eyebrow. I think you're thinking about this a little too hard. The man has been dead for 12 years. Hiccup scowled. One way or another, Brandine is Dago's son. He got this far without us knowing about it and it could have caused our family irreparable damage. Adriana huffed. What if Brandine was just another accident baby? That seems to be the trend. It just worked in Dago's favor. I have a hard time believing he had a kid just to be the Haddock's downfall. Don't underestimate this, Addy. I'm not, but what's he going to do that he hasn't already done? Adriana demanded, throwing her hands up in the air. I understand why this is a big deal to you, but he's already a criminal. Who cares who his dad is? He should still face justice. Astrid leaned forward. Adri, he will face justice, but think about this logically. How did Brandine get so close to us for so long without any of us knowing, any of the council knowing what his true heritage is? Dago was our greatest enemy, our biggest threat. We've had peace in our islands ever since he died. We came to terms with Alvin the treacherous of Outcast Island, and while we aren't on the greatest of terms with Ali, we've never had a serious fight with her. So how does the son of Dago the deranged get this close to us without any of us knowing? Even Eric didn't have an argument with that logic. I think Hiccup said. That Brandine is a whole lot smarter than we ever gave him credit for. I still don't understand why he'd go through all this trouble. Finn muttered. To get back at me, Finn. If Dago had killed me and you'd been forced to watch, don't you think you'd want revenge? Finn looked like he'd tasted something bitter. I don't know. Maybe. He seemed to reconsider his words and his eyes lowered. Yes. But still, he offered you guys help, befriended us, moved here, dated Anna all this time. What kind of revenge is that? Getting married would have been a big deal. Adriana said so quietly they almost missed it. Eric turned in his seat. What? She shrugged nervously. Not that we ever talked about marriage, but I'll admit that I considered spending my life with him. That was around the time that he started getting more. She scowled as if she'd bitten into a lemon. Forceful. So? Finn drawled. You think Brandine's master plan was to get you to fall in love with him, marry him, and possibly move to Berserker Island with him in time to take over the throne again? Yes. Adriana said. She looked a bit confused, but she spoke with confidence. And when I didn't give him what he wanted, well, here we are. To think if he'd never been so pushy, he might have succeeded. Eric mused. Again, why? Finn asked. What would he gain by marrying Anna and taking her to Berserker? She'd have to decide who she was most loyal to. Hiccup said quietly. Me or her husband? Adriana's eyes widened. But, how could I possibly make that decision? Exactly. Astrid said. That's where he underestimated you, Addy. Hiccup said. You were already loyal to us. You had values and you stuck to them. You weren't willing to give him what he wanted. Adriana scowled. I still dated him like an idiot. I'm the one who invited him to Burke. I still. She huffed and turned her face away from her family. I still walked into that barn with him by myself. I should have figured it out. I should have known. Am I just stupid? If you're stupid, we all are. Hiccup said darkly. He played everyone. Adri, you couldn't have known. Who would have guessed he was Dager's secret child? Up until a few hours ago, the idea would have been absurd. Astrid stood up and walked over, slipping an arm over her daughter's shoulders. What's done is done. And your dad is right, he did underestimate you. What if he tries to come take the baby back? Make him or her the heir. Can he do that? Adriana put a protective hand on her belly. Eric stood up, teal eyes alight. Not if you get married. Adriana's eyes widened. What? He's right. Hiccup looked between Eric and Adriana. If he marries you before the baby is born, then as long as Brandine doesn't show up to contest it, Eric gets all paternal rights by our laws. Adriana stared at Eric, her mouth slightly agape. You would do that? Marry me in the next few months? I just. She pressed her hands to her cheeks. That's so soon. Smiling at her puckered lips, Eric took her hands in his. I already promised I wasn't going to leave. This just makes it official. Whoa, hold on, okay. Finn finally rose from his seat. Isn't she a little young? Heck, aren't they both a little young? I mean, Eric's only 18 and Anna is having a baby. Astrid interrupted. I think the circumstances are already kind of extreme. Yeah, but Finn broke off. Hiccup gestured patiently. Go ahead, Finn. What if this is all for nothing? Finn asked. I'm not trying to disagree with everything you're saying, but this is all conjecture. It's not conjecture, it makes sense. Eric said. We don't have the facts. Finn stressed. What are we going to do when we announce the reason we are doing this? We won't announce it. Hiccup said, a gleam returning in his eye. Here's what we are going to do. Nothing. Barring their marriage, if it's really what we want to do to protect the baby, we aren't going to breathe a word about Brandine. When he comes forward with his big announcement, he won't have a head start on us. Eric smiled conspiratorially. Brandine will lose all his advantage. As long as we keep it quiet, yes. Hiccup agreed. But who would tell him? Finn asked. Do you think he has spies here? At this point I'm not ruling it out. Dad, you're totally assuming that our enemies have completely infiltrated our island. They can't have gained that much an advantage, there's no way. Didn't I say it's smart? Hiccup countered. How do you fool a strategist, Finn? You have think like a strategist. Eric replied. You have to be smarter than a strategist. Hiccup pointed at Eric. However, there's always a flaw. Often was that flaw? His own mother. Eric mused. But why would she tell you about it? Adriana asked. If it's true, that information is vital for all the tribes, not just Burke. Hiccup shrugged. I think she felt that she owed me an explanation for Brandine's behavior. It certainly clears up a few things. Wait. Finn said suddenly. What? That man who came and visited. What was his name? Finn snapped his fingers. Roscoe. I ran into them in the woods and Brandine was telling him. I don't know, something about waiting as long as he tells them to. Hiccup frowned. I knew that whole thing was fishy. They made their arguments sound so natural. Astrid remarked. We've already established that Brandine is a good actor. Hiccup sighed. I think there is a lot we don't know. He really had us fooled. Finn seemed convinced at last. Well, it doesn't matter. He can come at us with everything he's got because you guys have something that you didn't have with Dager. Hiccup raised an eyebrow. What's that? Us. Finn nodded to his sister and Eric. We aren't little kids anymore. We can fight back now. We don't have to stay home. Well. Adriana gazed down at her stomach. Finn waved a hand. Okay, me and Eric don't have to sit home and wait for news. We can go with you and do whatever we have to fight back. Well, let's not rush into things. Hiccup held up his hands. I'd prefer peaceful negotiations to fighting. That didn't work with Dager. I don't think it will work with Brandine. No, Hiccup sighed, running a hand through his hair. You're probably right. But let's not worry about that right now. Let's focus on the family. He looked at Adriana expectantly. Astrid turned to Adriana, rubbing her shoulder. So, what do you want to do? Adriana swallowed nervously. I want to talk it all through. Getting married, it's a good idea, even if this is all a hoax and Brandine isn't Dager's son. He could still try to claim the baby someday. She looked up at Eric, a nervous smile on her face. Let's get married. Eric beamed back. Finn sighed heavily. I need a vacation. You can vacation when you're dead, Valhalla's not going anywhere. Eric sassed. Hiccup and Astrid burst into laughter. Adriana walked into Eric's arms and inhaled deeply. He smelled like leather and cedar wood. We'll figure it out. He murmured into her hair. One day at a time. She murmured back. Her heart gave a lurch in sudden excitement and nervousness. Eric would most likely plan a proposal. A million questions flew into her head about the possibilities and the things they would need to plan. Where would they live? Would they find a house to move into or build a new one? They'd have to find a place for Lily and Charger to go. Oh gods, she'd need a dress. Adriana stepped back and stared up at Eric. He looked down at her quizzically. How are we even going to manage this before I pop? Eric snickered. He opened his mouth to reply when Finn suddenly whined out loud. That means I have to wear a suit, doesn't it? Adriana rolled her eyes. We've got bigger fish to fry than your outfit, Finnegan. One thing is sure. Astrid grabbed a strand of Finn's hair and tugged. Haircut. She looked over at her husband, who winced. Both of you. Adriana and Eric chuckled as both male haddocks whined in argument. Adriana realized that while yet another mishap had befallen their family, they'd discussed it rationally and had come up with a plan, and within minutes they were laughing. The stress lines had lessened on Hiccup's face and she wondered if Finn was whining intentionally just to lessen the tension. One thing was sure, if Brandine was the son of Dager the Deranged, he was in for a treat. She and Finn were children no longer. They would stand by their parents' sides for whatever he might have planned. And if he so much as took one step in her child's direction, she wouldn't hold back. Brandine Anderson's days would be numbered. Chapter 26, Looking Forward. Chapter text. The early morning glow of dawn cast a ghostly white mist across the land. The air was cold and crisp, the ground dry and cracked as the lone woman walked to the edge of the cliff as if in a trance. Her blue eyes, once brilliant with clever happiness, were dull and empty. Her hands and clothes were smeared with the blood of her enemy. She'd had her revenge. Only now, she had nothing left to live for, nothing left to lose. She was alone. She felt nothing except that dull emptiness inside. Her husband had been lost to her for so long, her children taken so cruelly. Looking up into the sky, she murmured, "You always did like free falling." She let her gaze fall to the swirling mists below. The crags rose from the deep, as if calling her name. A complete look of serenity washed over her face and she spread her arms to the sides. "I'm sorry," she breathed before finally she pitched forward. Astrid. Hiccup jerked awake with a wild thrash. Astrid startled awake beside him, a knife blade glinting in her palm. What? Her blue eyes scanned the darkened room for danger until they fell on him. Panting, Hiccup hunched over, his mind flashing with bloody images. His entire body was slick with cold sweat, his heart pounding painfully in his chest, even as he tried to push away the rising hysteria. He hadn't had that horrible nightmare in years. Brandine's secret must have triggered the dark memories of his past. Astrid had already dropped her knife on the bedside table and moved to his side. "Hiccup, breathe. Breathe. She commanded, hands on his face. Hiccup nodded shakily, breathing deeply with her. He could feel the sting of tears threatening to take over and he stubbornly clamped his teeth together. He was not going to lose it. The soft knock sounded at the door before it opened a crack. Finn poked his head in, a look of concern on his face. "You guys okay?" Hiccup felt a stab of embarrassment that his son was seeing him cower in his wife's arms. "Yes, everything is fine. Go back to bed, Finn," Astrid replied calmly. Hiccup heard the door click shut a few moments later. His wife held him for many long minutes. Finally, she softly broke the silence. "Hiccup. It's okay," he managed, sitting up and wiping the sweat from his face. "I'm okay." Astrid brushed his hair back. "Do you want to talk about it?" Hiccup swallowed, finally looking up at her. His heartbeat was still wild in his chest. Her blue eyes were so filled with worry and concern, but her calm demeanor gave him courage. He took another deep breath. "It was just you this time?" His wife nodded. "Not the kids?" "No." Hiccup wiped his forehead again. "You were covered in his blood and you walked to the edge." "Okay." Astrid hugged him close. "It's not real. That's never going to happen." Hiccup buried his face in her neck and inhaled deeply. It was another few minutes before his heart rate finally slowed and his grip on her waist relaxed. She brushed a hand through his hair again. "All right." "Yes." Hiccup sat back. He wished these stupid dreams would go away forever. He knew they weren't real, that Dager had died in the duel, that what was done and there was no changing it. No matter what Brandine could possibly scheme, Dager was dead. His wife seemed to read his thoughts. "Brandine can't be worse than he already is, Hiccup," Astrid murmured. "He hurt our daughter in the worst way. There's nothing worse." "I know, but we don't know what he's capable of." Hiccup grabbed his prosthetic and attached it, feeling the need to pace. Astrid stilled his hands. "You shouldn't lose sleep over it. Finn was right when he said that maybe we are thinking about this too deeply. I'd rather overthink it and be wrong." Hiccup rested his elbows on his knees and rubbed his face. "It's been 12 years. We haven't had a moment's rest with everything we've been through, but at least I could rest well knowing that part of our lives was done. And now?" Astrid snuggled into his side, resting her chin in the crook of his shoulder. "Brandine got too close." "I know. We have to be ready for anything, Astrid. If anything, for the baby's sake." "And we'll be ready," Astrid said, meeting his eye. Even after almost 20 years of marriage, he could still get lost in those fierce, deep blue orbs. Again, Finn was right. We aren't alone in this. We will have all of our friends on our side this time, and Eric will help us make sure Adriana and the baby are protected. Brandine won't get close again, and if he so much as enters the harbor he's going to eat my axe." Hiccup laughed, briefly kissing her temple. "Have I ever told you that you're hot when you're fierce?" "Well, I do believe you told me so on our first date." Astrid smirked. "I did." Hiccup blinked. "Yup. Right after you realized you were finally taller than me and I slapped you so hard you fell over. And proceeded to tell you through the pain that you were the hottest when you are fierce." Hiccup finished with a laugh. "He used to be so stupidly awkward." "Yup," Astrid said with a knowing look. "You said that it was completely intentional, you meant to say that just to make me hit you." Hiccup rolled his eyes. "Idiot. My idiot," Astrid whispered, pressing her lips to his jawline. Hiccup felt himself relax, even as her hands wove into his hair and she was kissing him passionately. Even after so long, he truly couldn't get enough of her. Except. Hiccup pulled away from her lips and placed a finger on her mouth. Finn is awake." The light in his wife's eyes died a little. "Oh yeah." He snorted in laughter, at least for a moment, until she suddenly stood. He watched curiously as she sauntered to the door, confused as to where she was going. Instead of leaving, she turned the lock and gave him a rogue smile. "I guess you'd better be quiet then." Hiccup's eyes widened briefly before she was shoving him onto his back and kissing him passionately. He matched her speed with earnest but had to clamp his jaw shut a minute later when her teeth grazed his collarbone. Astrid, really, he whispered hoarsely. She loomed over him with a wild grin. Don't give me that look, we have 2 children in the house, one of whom is pregnant, so she's likely awake, and the other is most definitely awake. Astrid rested a finger on his lips, halting his chatter. His heart was pounding at the look she was giving him, and she leaned closer. Stop talking. When she kissed him again, it was slower and deeper. She held his face in her hands so gently that he couldn't help but melt into the kiss. It reminded him of the times when they were teenagers and their relationship was so new. She'd always initiated their kisses back then. It wasn't until he'd grown a backbone at a solid 17 that he'd kissed her first. Yet it still amazed him after all this time that she had so much control over him. Just as her passion and strength had attracted him to her, it was her calm control that kept him sane. She was his first support when he'd befriended Toothless. To this day, she was his right arm, his closest companion, and he knew without a shadow of a doubt she'd do anything for him. Gently, he pulled the leather tie out of her hair and pushed his hands through her thick blonde hair. Astrid pulled back, panting slightly. Don't you have a meeting in the morning? Hiccup paused, his mind buzzing. Huh? What time is your meeting? Hiccup rubbed his face. 10. Oh, not so early then. She then proceeded to yank on his shirt. Hiccup laughed, and was promptly shushed. Crazy woman. We're not quite there yet, Astrid said with a glint in her eye. Hiccup sat up and pulled his shirt over his head. No sooner had he tossed it aside that she was pushing him onto his back again, kissing him earnestly. It occurred to him that perhaps she was doing this, in part, to take his mind off the nightmare. The thought made him pause, and his hands stilled on her back. Astrid noticed his sudden tension and paused. What? He stared into her pale face, a ghostly white from the moonlight outside. Her blue eyes were so dark at night. He slid a finger across her brow to push her hair aside. I'll never let that happen to you, Astrid. You're going to be old and grey, watching all of our grandbabies run around your ankles. I'll make sure you're never alone. Astrid simpered. Is that what you're worried about? Seeing that empty look in your eyes. Hiccup closed his eyes. I never want to see that happen. Hiccup, look at me. Hiccup obeyed and saw her eyes lit with passion. That's not going to happen. I will never be so far gone that I'll give up. What if you had none of us left? Don't you dare. Astrid said quietly. You know better than that, Hiccup, so don't you dare. Hiccup sighed and closed his eyes again. You're right. I'm sorry. You worry too much about the past and the future. You have to let it go. Astrid ran a hand down the length of his chest. You're becoming a control freak. It's difficult to stop. I know, it's awful hard to get you to relax anymore, Astrid replied, raising an eyebrow. Really? Hiccup asked. Astrid gave him an incredulous look, and he realized she was still straddling half his body. Oh. Astrid snorted and rubbed her face. Oh, forget it. Let's go back to bed. No. Hiccup pouted, wrapping his arms around her waist and locking his hands. His wife gave him a glare. You're the one who killed the mood. Yes, but you're so fierce and beautiful, I'm sure it won't take much. Hiccup said chastely. And you're the one who's all embarrassed because there are children in the house. Wouldn't be the first time. And I honest to God's hope they are both sleeping or they'll never look us in the eye again. Correction, they'll never look you in the eye again. You're so awkward. I am a manly man. Now they really won't look you in the eye again. Ah. Astrid laughed, pressing her lips to his forehead. Dork. You're dork. Hiccup whispered. With her so conveniently in his arms, it didn't take much to flip them over. Astrid gave a squeak of surprise and Hiccup pressed a finger to her lips. Sure. Astrid gave him a challenging smile and his heart fluttered. This woman was going to be the death of him someday. As the weeks went by and the summer gave way to chilly fall temperatures, the village was a non-stop bustle of activity. Frost began to coat the ground in the early mornings, which spurred the people into harvest season. The chief had organized the men and women and teenagers into various groups, each responsible for bringing in their store of fruits, vegetables, and fish. Hunting trips would be organized on other days to bring in boar and deer. Finn himself had been responsible for assisting the fishery with Zap, but after 6 long hours of weathering the chilly waters, Hiccup made a switch of teams and they were allowed to land at last. While Zap took a short nap in the sun, Finn took a break with some fresh cider from Ben the baker. He chatted with the old man for nearly 10 minutes before he finally broke away to rejoin the festivities. Of course, many of the teenagers had much to complain about. They whined about the bitter wind sweeping in from the ocean front, bemoaning their lack of warm clothes. Burke had taken on a sudden chill that they weren't prepared for. Their thick wool coats were still packed away deep in their trunks and closets. Finn didn't mind. It had been so long since he'd worked this hard that he invited the strain of his muscles and the chilly wind kept him cool. They had a long evening of festivities ahead and he didn't want to fly home to wash up first. As he dumped another bucket of corn into a wagon, he heard giggling. He looked over to see a gaggle of young girls watching him nearby as they nursed mugs of steaming cider. Finn gave them a wry grin and turned away, reveling in their hushed, excited chatter. "Quite the ladies' man, aren't you?" Finn rolled his eyes as Cliff trotted to his side and joined the line with him. "You're one to talk." Cliff grinned. "Yes, I admit that Tarin can't resist all this." He gestured down to his gangly self. "But I don't have the eyes of every single girl on Burke." Finn winced. "Not every girl." "Pretty much." Eric stepped in, wiping his forehead on his sleeve. His hair was curling at the ends with sweat. "You can't go very far without the girls all looking at you. And the grin proves it." Cliff laughed. Finn slapped his friend on the shoulder, trying to ignore his teasing. "So which one suits your fancy?" Cliff asked, waggling his eyebrows. "Huh?" Finn asked. "Which girl?" "Well yeah, he's not talking about sweet buns," Eric said sarcastically. "Or am I?" Cliff waggled his eyebrows again. Eric's eyes widened. "Cliff. I'm kidding, I'm KOF." Cliff flopped onto his back when Finn pushed him. He sat up in the dirt and grinning, pointed up the line. "You still haven't asked Inga. Would you shut up?" Finn hauled Cliff back to his feet. "People are listening." "Oh, so you do care about all those love-struck girls?" "I care about everyone's opinions, Cliff. Probably a little too much if your lack of motivation is any proof." Eric smirked. Finn sighed. He looked up the line to see Inga talking to Helga, her long braided hair hanging down her back. "Hey, you promised you'd talk to her if I talked to Clyde." Cliff poked him in the arm. "That was weeks ago, bro." "I'm aware," Finn replied, stepping forward as the line moved. "Well, what are you waiting for?" Eric picked a rock out of his prosthetic. "The gods don't typically send down a ray of sunlight to let you know when is the appropriate time. Sometimes you just have to man up and do it." "What if I don't want to do it?" Finn asked in irritation. "Because you don't like her that way?" Eric asked. "Or because you're afraid?" Finn groaned heavily. He was tired of going around in circles about this. If he was so unsure, then maybe he shouldn't bother. "Bruh, what's the worst that could happen?" Cliff asked. Never. Finn turned to him. "Ask me what's the worst that could happen. You don't know everything about me, guys." He stepped away again. "I know what I'm doing." "Right?" Eric shrugged. "Absolutely nothing." Finn glared at him, but just then his name was called. They turned to see Hiccup trotting up the line toward them, toothless on his heels. "I need you and Zap for something." Finn dropped his bin into Cliff's and joined his dad back down the hill, eager for a distraction. He didn't need Eric's rude opinions, he was trying to be smart about his decisions. There was nothing wrong with thinking things through. Being a thinker himself, he'd have thought Eric would appreciate that. Annoyed, Finn pushed his swarming thoughts about the guys and Inga away and focused on his dad's words. "They just need an extra boost," he was saying, waving toward the harbor as a lone ship slowly moved toward the docks. "I don't think they planned to catch that many fish." "Yeah, I'll help." Hiccup slapped his shoulder. "Thanks, kiddo. I'll be down there in a few minutes." Finn ran down the rest of the hill to find Zap. He ignored the whispers and giggles of the same group of girls as he ran past. He always figured at some point people would start becoming more vocal about his relationships and marriage, being the future chief and all. But he was a little disappointed to realize that he wasn't in the least bit prepared for it. He found Zap still snoozing in the dirt where he'd left her, only now the patch of sunlight had moved away so she was lying in the shade. Zap. Come on, fatty, we've gotta go. Zap opened an eye and growled at him softly. Finn rolled his eyes. Zap, come on. They need us in the harbor. Zap rolled over and covered her face with a shimmering wing. You're not even in the sunlight. Finn huffed. I think she's mad because you called her a fatty. A female voice said behind him. Finn whipped around to see Inga standing nearby, a basket in her hands. He looked up the hill to see the line -1 Inga. He must have looked confused because she said, Mara sent me a terror. She needs me at the healers. Oh. He replied with a stiff nod. Inga raised an eyebrow. Are you feeling okay? Me? Yeah, I'm fine. Okay, because you're acting weird. Finn dry swallowed. He wasn't even sure why he was acting so skittish all of a sudden. Maybe the guys pressuring him to ask her out all the time was finally getting to him. Just tired, I guess. He finally replied. Her healer training must have kicked in because she stepped forward. Is it your side? Finn stepped back, frowning. No. I'm fine. Inga stopped and they both stood there awkwardly. Finn felt the back of his neck burning. Okay, Inga finally said in an unsure tone. I have to go, Mara's waiting for me. She paused again before turning away. Bye, Finn. Finn watched her walk away, feeling guilty for he didn't know what. She looked so disappointed. Why was he feeling so standoffish all of a sudden? He'd never felt that way with Inga before. Zap sat up beside him and bumped his shoulder with her nose. Oh, don't you start too. The shockjaw nipped at his sleeve, her long sinuous tail wagging in the dirt. Finn huffed. Oh, whatever. Come on, they're waiting for us. He mounted his dragon and steered her toward the harbor. Had he been looking the other way, he would have seen Inga's unsure blue eyes watching him fly away from the streets below. At the end of a long day, the villagers finally congregated in the Great Hall. There was still much work to be done, but as per tradition, Burke's best cooks and their wives gathered at the hall with the best of the stores and prepared a huge celebratory meal in honor of the plentiful harvest. Tables were covered with countless dishes and platters, the drink stand had some of the finest meads and wines and other beverages, and Grandma Ingerman and her girls had pulled out all the stops. The dessert table was bursting with tasty treats. The hall was filled with jovial laughter and even the stingiest of Burke's members seemed to have forgotten to scull. Eric was able to steer Adriana to a comfortable table near a warm fire without receiving any unwelcome looks or comments. Up to this point, she'd made it a habit to ignore rude people. However, he could still see the relief in her eyes that for one night, she didn't have to make a conscious effort. Today was a special day, one they'd enjoyed with every other hooligan. They didn't want it tainted more than anyone else it seemed. Adriana had been badgering him with endless questions since he picked her up from her house. Even now, she hadn't stopped to take a breath as she sat down at the secluded table. Usually he didn't mind, but he knew it was nervous stress. My dad said we can look in the west side of the village to build a house, she was saying, looking up at him. But I don't know if you want to wait until spring to start building. The sooner the better, I expect. Eric replied. You'll be having the baby before spring. Yes, but it's already starting to get cold out and I'd really rather you weren't building a foundation and the roof in the snow and ice. I won't be alone, Finn and Cliff volunteered to help, and I'm sure there will be others. Yeah, but... Annie. Eric bent down and held her shoulders. Relax. We'll figure it out. Tonight let's just take a break, okay? Adriana sighed heavily. Okay. Eric pecked her forehead before straightening again. I'm going to get us some food and drinks. I can help. Adriana started to stand. No, it's okay, I've got it. Eric turned towards the nearest line. I'm still fully capable. She grumbled, sitting back down. He turned a knowing look over his shoulder before stepping in line. He lost sight of her with one of the supporting pillars in the way, but was relieved to see Cliff and Taryn joining her. Within minutes he had 2 full plates of food balanced on top of a couple of cups filled to the brim with cider. His girlfriend and friends were deep in conversation when he returned. "Wow, bro," Cliff blinked in amazement. "How'd you manage to carry all that without spilling?" Eric held up the cups, on top of which the full plates were balancing. "I have impeccable balancing skills. Now if you can do that on a tightrope, you'll fit right in at a circus." Cliff cheered. Taryn snorted as she tore a roll in half. "He'd make a good clown." Eric frowned as he gave Adriana one of the plates and cups. "Cliff would make a better clown." "Oh sure, we all know that I'd be the fun, loving, troublemaking clown," Cliff replied, pausing to take a long drink of cider. "You'd be the sad, mopey clown." "Oh come on, he's adorable." Adriana pinched his cheek playfully and Eric's scowl deepened. "See? Positively mopey." Cliff chuckled. Eric filled his spoon with a large dollop of mashed potatoes and flicked the spoon toward Cliff, effectively spattering his face and shirt. Cliff yelped. "Hey! Stop that!" He quickly wiped his face with a napkin. "Are you trying to get me busted? Gotta make a good impression." "Oh please," Taryn scoffed. "After last night, I think my parents are well aware of your clumsiness." "Oh?" Adriana asked. No, Cliff pointed at Eric. "This has nothing to do with me, this is all him." "What horrors did Cliffy bestow on the brands this time?" Eric asked. "Well. No, Taryn." Cliff shushed her wildly. "Resist the temptation. He was helping my mom set the food on the table for dinner. Do not give in to his wicked wiles. And he might have spilled the gravy in his haste." "Oh dear." Adriana grinned. "Oh that's not all," Taryn grinned, leaning away from Cliff's fork full of stuffing that was being forced toward her mouth. "He slid through the gravy, fell onto the table, flipped it over completely. Oh my gods." Eric buried his face in his hand, fork dangling beside his face. He emerged with gravy and potatoes in his hair and the rolls had gone flying. Taryn and Adriana were laughing hard while the boys had covered their faces in embarrassment. "It was okay though. It was okay. I thought my parents were going to be so upset, but they were nearly crying with laughter." "Even your dad?" Eric asked with a grin. "Oh yeah." Taryn nodded, elbowing her furiously blushing boyfriend. The look on Cliff's face as he went down was just too priceless. It was like he was begging the gods to spare him. "No please no." Eric and Adriana's laughter was echoing with the hilarious mental image. Yeah, laugh it up," Cliff intoned. Taryn tucked her hand around his arm and slid closer to him on the bench before returning to her food. Cliff's embarrassment gave way to a goofy grin. Eric laughed into his cider at the look. His brother's eyes narrowed and he kicked him under the table. Eric's stump flared and he yelped, jolting in his seat. Adriana's hand flew to his arm as Cliff's eyes widened in horror. "Oh gods, Eric, I'm sorry." "It's okay. It's okay." Eric shook his head, stretching out his knee. The pain ebbed away within a minute. "I'm okay." Cliff looked like he wanted to kick himself. "Oh, I'm sorry." "Dude, it's okay, don't make me throw more potatoes at you." Eric lifted his spoon for emphasis. "I'm fine, honest." Cliff sighed, shooting Taryn a furtive glance. "Okay." Adriana squeezed Eric's arm, catching his attention. He gave her a smile, conveying that yes, he really was fine. His stump wasn't even throbbing. Luckily the kick had been playful and hadn't caused very much pain. Adriana seemed to read his thoughts and went back to her food without comment. Finn ambled through the rows upon rows of tables, enjoying the festivities but still thinking about some of the day's work. When he'd met the ship out in the harbor for example, he and Zap had slowly but surely made their way toward the docks, taking a few large nets filled to the brim. When the ship had finally docked, the men and women unloaded the fish and took it into the fishery for cleaning. Hiccup and Toothless were watching from the air, nodding in approval when a shout sounded on the deck. Finn had turned just in time to see one side of a net's rope slipped loose of its knot, plunging many fish back into the ocean. In a flash, his dad and Toothless had twisted and seamlessly dived headfirst into the water. They'd re-emerged a few moments later, the rope in Hiccup's hands. Together with a few men, they'd managed to tie the net back together. Overall it hadn't been a very big deal, albeit inconvenient they'd lost some of the fish. But Finn couldn't get the dive out of his mind. Toothless, being a thin species of dragon of the strike class, could dive into water pretty easily. Of course, he always needed Hiccup with him because without the flying mechanism and prosthetic he could drown. Zap, however, was a water dragon. He couldn't help but wonder if they could dive into the water without breaking Finn's neck. How did his dad do it? He decided to ask when he saw his dad talking amicably to an elderly gentleman, who was missing a few teeth. Finn stayed back, willing to wait until their conversation ended, but the old man caught sight of him lurking. "Oh there, Finny. How's it going there, laddie?" Hiccup turned, broad smirk on his face at the nickname. Finn shot his dad a short look as he came closer. "Good, sir, yourself?" "Sir." The old man chortled, slapping Finn's shoulder with surprising strength. "Dunno about that, but I'm doing mighty fine. I was just telling your ole pop that he should be readying his retirement soon, eh? Grandbaby on the way and all, heh heh." He nudged Hiccup in the ribs with a knobbly elbow. Hiccup chuckled. "While that's true, Angus, I'm not sure I'm ready to retire just yet. I'm not that old. Nor but he's getting up in age and all." Angus pointed at Finn with a toothy grin. "Pretty soon he'll be getting married and having his own lil tykes running around." Finn coughed uncomfortably. He was definitely not ready for that just yet. His dad looked like he was doing everything he could not to laugh. "Someday, Angus. I think we're taking it a little slow." Finn nodded in agreement. "Slow?" Angus' white eyebrows shot into his receding hairline. "Now see here, Chief, these youngins are getting married a bit late, don't ya think? Why, my Betsy and I, we were a fresh 16 when we was married. Had the ceremonial wedding and consummation and you know what? She was with child within a fortnight, I tell ya. Though we aren't the only couple who had honeymoon babies, eh?" Angus chuckled and elbowed Hiccup in the ribs again. Finn could feel his neck burning. He sorely wished he had not walked in on this conversation. Hiccup seemed to be thinking the same thing. It was his turn to clear his throat awkwardly. "You're at the ripe age o' 17, Finny boy, you find yourself a pretty girl and settle down quick, eh?" Angus continued, shrugging his eyebrows suggestively. "Gonna need ourselves another heir before long. Angus, you old bag o' bones." "Oh, that'll be Betsy." Angus grinned. A tiny woman with frizzy white hair bustled up to them. "Are you bothering the chief again?" "Oh, no bother at all, Betsy." Finn barely kept himself from giving his father an incredulous look. "No need to be polite, Chief, I can see the horror in your son's eyes." Betsy's eyes twinkled. "I think I'll take this one home before he finds the mead." As they passed arm in arm, the old woman stopped and patted Finn on the arm. "Don't you mind him, dearie, times have changed. You take your time in finding the right girl. You're young, enjoy it." She winked and bustled her toothy husband away. The haddock men stood there for a moment before Finn snorted and Hiccup erupted into barely restrained laughs. "Finn, your face. I don't ever want to walk in on your conversations again. The last bit of advice wasn't so bad though, right?" "Yeah, I guess," Finn sighed, glancing back at the old couple. Sweet old Betsy smoothed things over. His dad laughed again. "Sorry about Angus, though. He's a bit of an old soul. Harmless but he's stuck in the old, traditional ways. I noticed." Finn turned and followed his dad as they weaved their way through the crowd. "Dad. Did anyone start badgering you about marriage at 17? "Not really." Well, Hiccup cast him a short look. "My dad. He wanted grandbabies." Finn made a face. "I can't imagine having kids anytime soon." "Neither did I, kiddo, that's why I waited." Hiccup turned when a man stuck out his hand and wished him a happy harvest. The chief nodded and continued walking with Finn. "Granted, I waited a while. I mean, 20. That's not too far from 17. Finn could feel his dad watching him. "Any girl on your mind?" Finn shrugged. He looked right at Inga, because of course he knew where she was, and quickly looked away. "Why are you hesitating?" Hiccup asked calmly. I don't even know, Finn murmured. They stopped and watched Inga and Alton and a few other teens toss marshmallows into the air and trying to catch them in their mouths. I want to be friends with her. That's a key element. But I don't know if I want to pursue more than that. She's a lot younger than me and something just doesn't feel right about it. But I don't know what that is. Hiccup mulled on his words for a minute before replying, then just be her friend for now, Finn. Everyone changes with age, maybe she's just not ready yet. Finn sighed through his nose, trying not to be cynical. Except people seem to bring girls up to me a lot these days. Kiddo, don't worry about what the village thinks. I didn't teach you to be aware of their constant watch so you'd be paranoid. Hiccup said. Just be yourself, be her friend, and let time take its course. Maybe you'll be more confident with that direction, or maybe not, maybe something completely different will happen. What about Helga? Bones. Finn snorted, giving his dad an amused look. Nah. That one's in the books. I never know with you kids. Cliff and Taryn are getting on though. I dare say I played a key role in getting them together. Huh? Finn whirled. His dad's eyes were twinkling. What did you do? Nothing at all, just convinced Clyde to give him a shot. Looks like he took my advice. Medda. Finn grinned. It's called matchmaking. Finn Hiccup crossed his arms with a smirk. When you're older, you'll find it quite entertaining. Please, I'll have more important things to do than spy on the teenagers and their sad love stories. Yes, you'll be writing their vows for the future weddings. Joy. Hiccup snickered. Chiefing isn't all hard work. Sometimes you get to sit in the office or fly for a few hours. Which reminds me, Finn suddenly said, remembering the real reason he'd approached his dad. I was going to ask you about that dive you and Toothless did. Dive? Hiccup's brow furrowed in thought. Oh yeah, at the docks. Yeah. How'd you learn to do that without breaking your neck? Hiccup winced as if he'd remembered something painful. The key is to dive straight down, forehead to saddle. That's it? Finn asked. No. Hiccup watched him silently for a minute. It takes a lot of practice and I don't want you doing it without me there. If you did break your neck, your mother would kill me. You kidding me? Finn smirked. The entire village would revolt, they all want me to get married and start having kids. Hiccup snorted but said seriously, I can teach you to do it if you really want. Who knows when you might need to. Besides, Zach being title class and all, it might work a lot better for you than us. Finn looked around. Where is Toothless? His dad's eyes fluttered in a half-eye roll. He found the mead. Uh-oh. Finn grinned, looking towards the drink station. Sure enough, one useless black reptile was currently passed out beside 3 empty barrels. Oh, he's going to be cranky tomorrow. Yup. Luckily, I plan to sleep in myself. Hiccup said. We did well today, everything is on schedule. We all deserve a break. Finn watched his dad survey the village. He'd already been awake last night when his dad had shouted. Finn had been sure that someone had broken in and was attacking his parents with the terror in his dad's voice. But it had only been a nightmare. Only a nightmare, Finn scoffed to himself. He knew what it was like to have nightmares, to relive frightening moments of your life in the subconscious and unable to make it stop. Thankfully his nightmares had stopped a while ago. He hadn't suffered from sleep loss for quite some time. Yet he wondered what exactly it was that his dad had dreamed, that he'd shouted Astrid's name with such terror. What, kiddo? Finn flinched. So lost in thought as he was, he hadn't realized he'd been staring. Nothing. What are you worried about, Finn? An odd question. He forgot sometimes how in tune his dad could be. He debated making something up or saying nothing again. But in the end, he decided honesty was better. You. Hiccup frowned in confusion and looked over at him. About last night, I mean. Finn added. Oh. Hiccup said, looking away. He didn't elaborate. Finn hadn't thought it through, he just asked it. What did you dream? His dad looked at the ground, arms still crossed tightly across his chest. Clearly he didn't want to talk about it. Never mind. Your mom dying. Finn stared at him, horror-struck. His dad was already staring back at him. I died in the duel. She'd already lost you and Addy. Hiccup seemed to stare past him. So she killed him, and then herself. He blinked and locked eyes with Finn again. Finn swallowed, feeling awkward. He couldn't imagine having a nightmare like that, and he himself had had some horrible dreams. Sorry, I shouldn't have asked. It's okay, Finn. You're no stranger to pain. Hiccup said quietly. Finn saw the flash of self-loathing in his dad's eyes. He knew what thoughts were swirling in his head, that Finn's horrible past was his fault. That Adriana had suffered just as much, and that too had been his fault. That Brandine had hurt her and hidden his true identity from them. That he hadn't figured it out sooner. Looking for something to change the subject, Finn noticed Tough Nut crouched over Toothless near the drink station. Dad. I think Tough Nut is messing with your saddle. Hiccup snapped to attention, eyes narrowed. Oh no, you don't. He stalked forward and made his way through the crowd. Finn watched in amusement as his dad walked up to Tough Nut, stood behind him with arms crossed and his fake leg bobbing impatiently against the stone floor. Tough Nut finished his scheme with a toothy grin, stood and turned to walk away, and got a close-up view of the chief's dangerously narrowed green eyes. Hwara! Tough Nut floundered backwards, arms flailing before he tripped over Toothless' prone body. He crashed into the drink stand, which sent cups and tins of liquid flying in all directions. A loud chicken screech could be heard from the scuffle and many people joined Finn in laughing at the ridiculous scene. Tough Nut sat up with a pitcher on his head and his beloved chicken flapped on top of it, pecking at the tin every few seconds. Ow ow. Chicken. I demand you desist at once. Ow. Tough Nut's voice echoed through the tin. Serves you right, Tough Hiccup said over the loud pings emitting from the tin. Karma is sweet when you mess with the chief's saddle. I was merely leaving you a birthday present, Chief. Obviously. Ping ow. Chicken. Yeah, because my birthday is totally on harvest day. Hiccup's voice dripped with sarcasm, earning a few more chuckles from the crowd. Aha. Told ya, sis, his birthday is totally ping-ah. Tough Nut flailed his arms to try and catch his chicken. He grabbed the bird in his hands and began to scold it before a boot connected with the bucket with a large wham. Even Finn flinched. Tough Nut crumpled to the side moaning. Everyone turned to see Rough Nut beaming, one boot missing. His birthday is definitely not on harvest day. Yes, thank you, Rough Nut. Hiccup drawled. Would you please take your brother out of the middle of the aisle? With pleasure. Rough Nut stuffed her foot back into her boot and grabbed her brother by the ankles. She gave a breathy chortle as she began to drag him away, still moaning with the bucket scraping against the stone floor as they went. Finn shook his head in disbelief. He wondered what it must have been like to grow up with those two. Looking up at his dad running a heavy hand through his hair, he then considered if his dad might be wondering how these two were still acting this way after 20 long years. Hiccup. Hiccup turned around just in time to see a blonde head bobbing up and down through the crowd, making its way toward him in the most polite way possible, given that it required quite a lot of pushing and shoving. Hiccup waited until the blonde caught up to him, revealing Eric. Hiccup, hi. Eric said, looking a bit tired. Sorry, I didn't want to miss you and I saw you were leaving. Just to go home. Hiccup said with a small smile. Were you coming to walk me there? I mean Toothless has nothing on you as a fierce protector. Ha, ha. Eric deadpanned. You're hilarious, Hiccup. Seeing as he's passed out inside from mead overdose. You saw that? Oh yeah. Eric grinned. At any rate you should travel around with that act. Oh, if I weren't the chief of the hooligans and a parent, I'd probably have traveled a lot more. Well, not that I didn't before. Hiccup said, making his way out into the chilly exterior of the Great Hall, Eric at his heels. Ah, that's better. I love our people but not all crammed together. You can say that again. Eric agreed, falling in step with the slightly taller chief. The sun's final rays were just sinking beneath the horizon and the torches were lit all around them. There was something very nice about walking through Burke at this time of year. Both Hiccup and Eric surveyed the village for a moment from their elevated height before descending the staircase. So I wanted to talk to you about something. Oh, you didn't want to walk with me just to keep me company? Hiccup quipped, grinning at Eric. Oh no, it's not. I didn't mean it like that. Eric felt a bit of heat rise to his face despite the autumn chill. I don't have an agenda, we haven't talked about Annie yet. Not since we found out about the complicated stuff. You can say his name, Eric. Hiccup sighed. I'm not going to strangle the nearest living thing at the sound of it. Eric rubbed his neck. That's a relief. But you're right. Hiccup said, taking the familiar turn toward his own house. We do need to talk about my daughter. Well, I know we decided to get married kind of suddenly, but I meant what I said. I think it's a good idea and we can protect the baby better this way. Hiccup nodded in agreement. Eric stopped suddenly with a soft hiss of frustration and picked a few loose pebbles out of his prosthetic. Hiccup paused him with a hand on his shoulder. You've been doing that a lot lately. Let me see the bottom. Eric held onto a nearby barrel and drew his leg back. Hiccup noticed the bottom of his prosthetic was acquiring a few jagged edges. Let's run into the forge real quick, I can smooth that out. Hiccup gestured him forward. Unless you have something else going on. His future son-in-law shook his hair. No, I was just going home. Finn's taking Annie home so I could talk to you. Good. Hiccup nodded, leading the way toward the forge. This way we can talk the future while I work. Lighting the forge only took a moment, clearly Gobber and Vidar had already closed up shop for the day. Eric hopped onto a cleared desk and watched as Hiccup discarded his leather gear and found the necessary tools he'd need. Alright, let's see this. Hiccup gestured to Eric's right leg. The teenager unclipped his prosthetic and handed it over. Hiccup inspected the jagged edges and easily began to shave down the metal with the grindstone. Easy fix then? Eric asked. Yes, Hiccup replied, inspecting the metal again. But I think you may need to upgrade. He tapped his own prosthetic against the table leg. Really? Hiccup could hear the hidden excitement in his voice. Not many people knew about all the ingenious parts of his prosthetic, in fact, many didn't care. Older folk were content with much simpler methods of prosthetics. Over the years of flying and being an amputee, Hiccup found his prosthetic to be just as useful a tool as his hands. That being said, Eric was cut from the same material as him. He was smart and could appreciate the practical sides of having a prosthetic that did more than help him walk. A sudden idea burst into his brain and he had to keep the excitement off his face as he said, I think it will do you some good to have a prosthetic that won't fall apart easily. Agreed. Eric chuckled. A few more tweaks on the metal and Hiccup handed the prosthetic back. How does that feel? Eric reattached it and walked around the forge, surveying the feel and various movements. Hiccup watched to see any flaws. Finally, Eric said, good. Thanks, Hiccup. No problem. I know it's a pain to deal with, but anytime it needs a tune-up just let me or Gobber know. Okay. Hiccup quickly doused the forge and grabbed his jacket, following Eric out the door. As he locked up the doors once again, he said, so, what's the plan for a house then? Okay, Eric began. So we were considering building, but I'm not exactly sure if I have enough money saved up to do that yet. I might need another year to save. We can help, No. Eric said in a strict voice. We're getting enough criticism from people, I don't want to hear about how we're mooching off the chief. Hiccup scowled. That's not to say we wouldn't be grateful. Eric added quickly. I just want to do it right. I understand, Hiccup said, nodded at a guard as he strode past. They could see many lamplights dousing from inside multiple windows as they walked. So if you needed to wait another year to build the house you want, where are you going to live? Well, that's what I've been trying to figure out, Eric sighed. You could live at our house, Hiccup thought. Except that's exactly ideal for your newly married life. Yeah. Eric blushed. Hiccup fought back a smirk. He wouldn't have wanted Astrid to move into his father's house either after their wedding. He thought for another moment. Well, here's an idea. What if we knock out that wall between Addie and Finn's rooms, and we make another master room with a baby room on the side, at least for now? Eric blinked. And where would Finn go? Please don't say the barn loft, he'd never forgive me. He could move in with Cliff. Eric blinked again and chortled. I think he'd take the loft. It would be good for him. Hiccup, be reasonable. Eric shook his head. We can't kick Finn out just for mine and Annie's convenience. Hiccup sighed. It's not ideal, no. Eric's house he shared with Cliff came into view at last and they paused in front of it, both deep in thought. Finally, Eric snapped his fingers. Unless. Hiccup asked. The blonde looked unsure he even wanted to voice his thought. Well, what if me and Addie lived here until we could build a house? Hiccup considered this. And where would Cliff go? Eric winced. I don't know. I wouldn't want to make him go back to his parents, he's enjoying the freedom. Maybe. Hiccup mused, thinking fast. It would be very odd, different. Maybe what? The chief shrugged. Maybe he can move in with us. We'll have an extra room. Gods, Finn is really going to hate us. Hiccup laughed. I'll talk to Astrid about it before we mention it to Addie and Finn. Okay. Eric stretched, looking toward the bridge, beyond which lay the Haddock house. Well, more harvest stuff tomorrow. Yep. Alright, I'll see you tomorrow, Eric. Night, Chief. Hiccup left the little house, considering this little plan further as he crossed the bridge and his own house came into view. He chuckled to himself, wondering what Finn would say about having a little brother in the house. Chapter 27, Confessions. Chapter text. Alright Misters 1 and 2, can either of you cut the mystery and intrigue and please explain where we're going? Eric rolled his eyes. For the last time, Finn, would you just be patient? She's not here. Finn said impetuously. Even if she was nearby, we could probably walk faster and lose her. Don't make fun of your sister. Hiccup warned. She's pregnant. Finn intoned. Point is, you two have dragged me all the way out here without explaining why. It's cold. And he paused, scowling at the building where they were heading. And you're making me go back in there. You realize I spent a good 10 hours in the forge today. Hiccup came to a halt and gave his son a flat stare. Eric unlocked the forge door, glancing in amusement over his shoulder. After a swift unspoken argument with his dad, Finn pursed his lips and followed him inside. Eric closed the door and sighed anxiously. All right, let's see it. Hiccup said, crossing his arms. Eric withdrew a small leather bag from an inner pocket of his jacket. Untying it, he carefully tipped the contents into his palm, a single purple diamond. The Haddock's eyebrows both jumped and Finn whistled. Nice rock. Yeah, Eric gulped. It cost a lot, so I haven't let it out of my sight. Really? How much? Hiccup made a face. Rude, Finn. May I? Eric handed the jewel to the chief, who inspected it with a careful eye. Well, what would you like to do with it? I'm glad you asked, Eric said excitedly, pulling a notebook out of another pocket. I made a couple sketches. But he winced, flipping pages and glancing up at Hiccup. I'm not as good of a drawer as. Nonsense, I've seen your drawings. Let's see. Hiccup stepped to his side to peer over his shoulder. Finn joined his other side to see the image. Eric waited nervously as they both looked at the crude drawing. Finn made a face. Bleh, it's definitely her. Did I ever mention you're the sappiest of them all? And you're the sassiest of them all, Finn. Thanks. She'll love this, Eric. Hiccup said, ignoring their banter. Eric brightened. You can make it. It'll take a little time, but yes, I think we can do this no problem. Great. Eric exclaimed, a weight lifting off his shoulders that he hadn't realized was there. He loved his girl and he wanted everything to be absolutely perfect for the days and years ahead. There's only one thing. Hiccup took the notebook and pulled a charcoal pencil off a nearby desk. What's her ring size? 5. The chief smiled. Same as Astrid. He began making notes and calculations on the page that Eric couldn't necessarily make out, simply because he was used to making larger calculations for the leather shop. We should be able to start working on this tomorrow. When's the big day? Eric grinned. Sooner than you think. He relayed the date and even Finn couldn't stop the smile. Eric sounded like a little kid on Snoggletog with the excitement in his voice. I do love deadlines, Finn said. Let's get cracking. Dead leaves and dry sticks crunched beneath Alton's boots as he trekked through the brush, Inga on his heels. He listened to her talk as they made their way toward the river, deep in the woods and far from their home. They made it a habit to take walks in the woods a few times a week, happy to spend time with one another. Mara believed it was good for Inga to get some exercise outdoors to keep her healthy. Thus, their usual walk plunged them deep into the forest and gave them much time to talk. Today, however, Inga was doing most of the talking, and it was beginning to disconcert him. And he just gave me this weird look like Inga shook her head in agitation. Her long, dark braids swished across her back, drawing his eye. Like he didn't want me checking on his health. I'm basically his go-to healer since his accident, so it's not a big deal if I ask if he's feeling alright, right? Alton opened his mouth to reply, but she'd already begun speaking again. Of course, knowing Finn, he's just feeling indignant because he doesn't want to be coddled. But even then, he really shouldn't be so touchy. Inga paused. He's been cranky for a while now, actually. Picking up a handful of smooth stones, Alton said nothing and faced the water. Inga had been talking about Finn a lot lately and it was starting to grate on his nerves, having to play this clueless, innocent game. What do you think? Inga asked suddenly. Alton threw a rock, watching it skip across the smooth water. He glanced at her before tossing another rock. About what? Finn, obviously. Inga replied, picking up a handful of stones herself. That's who I've been talking about after all. Or is your mind on far, distant lands as usual? Alton ignored the jibe. Well, which part do you want me to comment on? Finn's injury, the professional side of your relationship? Or the fact that he's been dancing around you all summer? He threw another rock, ignoring Inga's sharp eyes boring into the side of his face. What do you mean? She asked. He's talked to me about a lot of things that he normally doesn't mention to other people. We have more than a professional relationship. Mara just decided to make me his healer. That's the problem though, isn't it? Alton asked, finally looking at her. Finn doesn't like to be forced into anything. Maybe when your relationship was still so new and he was just starting to trust you. He faltered, thinking out loud. People forcing you together on a regular basis, I don't know, what if that's freaked him out a bit? Inga looked confused. What would freak him out? Finn is no stranger to the healers. It's not about the healers, Inga, that's what I'm trying to tell you. Alton sighed. Well, spit it out then, what are you trying to say? Inga demanded. Alton watched her warily as she threw another stone into the water. Her aim was so off it only fell in the water with a mighty floomp. You want the honest truth? No, I want you to lie to me. Inga, Alton said, heart thumping. I think you like Finn, and you're so loyal that you'd take his secrets to the grave, whatever they may be. While that makes you an invaluable friend, I think that maybe there's more to your relationship than what it is. Inga stared at him. So what? You don't think Finn likes me? You think he regrets telling me anything about his past? Well, yes and no. Alton took a deep breath. I don't think he regrets telling you anything. I don't know what those secrets could possibly be, but I know Finn. He values those he trusts. He's going to need that trust when he's chief, not that I think he makes his decisions just because he's going to be chief, mind you. But to have those trustworthy friends established beforehand, I mean, that's important to him. But. Inga raised an eyebrow. But. Alton bit his lip. I don't think he likes you like that. How would you know? Inga asked. It's not like you and him are exactly best friends. No, but I am observant. Alton replied. He didn't know where this inner calm was coming from, but he was amazed that he'd been able to say all this after thinking it for so long. Alton had been watching his best friend pine after the chief's son since the day he'd come home with Johan almost 2 months ago. Obviously her crush had been going on for some time beforehand. Alton been so excited to see her, to spend time with her again, just to talk about Finn all the time. He'd been thankful up till now that Finn didn't seem interested in pursuing Inga. That, however, only made his job harder. Inga, Alton sighed when she didn't reply. I don't want to hurt your feelings, but I can tell that Finn and I have that in common, even if he doesn't realize it yet. Inga's blue eyes snapped to stare at him. Her face was beginning to flush in anger. I just don't want you to get hurt, Alton pleaded. Why do you care anyway? Inga snapped. His heart gave a lurch and Alton looked away. The hurt must have shown on his face because Inga suddenly sighed. I'm sorry. It's obvious, isn't it? Alton looked at her again, heart pumping. It is. Yeah, Inga said softly. You're my best friend. It's your job to be honest and tell me what you think. Besides, I did ask. His heart plunked down to somewhere in his stomach. So she didn't know after all. Did he say anything else about the topic, or should he let it drop? He had wanted to tell her for so long now. Well, Finn's a stubborn pain in the butt, but he's not stupid. I'm sure he'll figure it out. You know what they say, it pays to be patient. Inga grinned. Despite his discouragement, Alton had to smile. I've never heard that statement before. That's because, dear Alton, Inga smirked, walking back to the trail. It's a Jorgensen saying. This time, Alton laughed out loud. Somehow he highly doubted that the Jorgensen clan knew anything about patience. He jogged to catch up with his best friend, glad when she started up a new string of conversation. He couldn't help but wonder though how his best friend would ever notice him when she had her eyes on fearless Finn. The 9th of September came without any preconceived ideas. Adriana roused around 9 in the morning, slipped on her fuzzy slippers and sauntered downstairs for breakfast. When she emerged with visions of eggs and bacon in her mind's eye, her mother nearly ran to her from the washroom. Adri. Astrid grinned, snatching the pan out of her hands and quickly throwing in some eggs as if reading her thoughts. Beautiful morning. I'll make you breakfast, bacon. Adriana blinked. Sure. I can do that though. No, that's okay, you go ahead and take a hot bath, okay. Frowning, Adriana watched her mother's grin stretch until she had deep wrinkles around her eyes. Why? Because it's a beautiful day to be clean. Astrid said, shooing her toward the washroom. Now off you get, if you're quick your eggs won't be cold. The door closed in her face and Adriana blinked. What? Confused, she turned to the steaming water in the tub. She sniffed experimentally, smelling the lavender and lemon wafting to her nose. Actually the idea of a hot bath sounded wonderful, but knowing her family there was bound to be some sort of prank or trap ready to. What? She was pregnant. Her parents or brother wouldn't spring any traps on her in the washroom and risk her slipping and falling. With a decisive nod, she quickly stripped and eased into the hot bath, sighing happily at the heated water. Adriana wasn't ginormous yet, but her back and feet always ached by lunchtime. Maybe her mother was just in an extremely excitable mood today. Sometimes she got like that. Or maybe she just knew what it was like to be pregnant and feel like an utmost fatty, especially when your male counterpart was a twig and ate less than you did a day. Whatever the case, the bath was wonderful. She didn't want cold eggs, however, so she quickly washed her hair and got out, careful not to slip on the wet floor. She wrapped up in a purple robe, ready to retreat to her bedroom to find comfy clothes when she saw it, a purple dress with a note attached. Wear this, Adriana mused, reading her mother's handwriting. What? But, comfy clothes, she hissed softly, pouting slightly. Mom. Yeah. Astrid called from the other side of the door. Why do I have to wear a dress? A horrible thought struck her. Oh my gods, you didn't throw me a surprise baby shower, did you? So what if I did? Astrid called. Oh man. Adriana sighed. She was getting used to people's looks and many were going out of their way to make her feel welcome. But she felt most comfortable when she spent time with her friends and family. She didn't want to feel put on the spot. Oh well, she whispered, grabbing the dress and finding clean underclothes folded on a chair beside it. Just get it over with. Who doesn't like free baby clothes? Donning the dress wasn't as difficult as she'd expected. Inspecting herself in the mirror, it fit to her curves in a natural way that didn't make her look like a monstrous nightmare. She wasn't sure what to expect of her baby bump. The dress made it look more pronounced, or at least she thought so. Exiting the washroom, she found a plate of eggs and bacon and toast waiting for her. However, her mom stopped her with a glowing look. "Oh good, it fits. Where'd you get it?" Adriana asked curiously. "And tell you all my secrets?" Astrid teased. "Mom." "All right," Astrid sighed, glancing toward the door as if expecting eavesdroppers. "Your father had it imported from Johann." "What?" Adriana gaped. "But how does it possibly fit me?" "Your father said something about stretchy fabric." Astrid shrugged, ushering her daughter to the chair. "But we were really crossing our fingers. We got lucky. Now eat up, you've got a long day ahead of you." "Why?" Adriana asked, a third of her plate already gone. She helped herself to some juice. "Don't we ladies usually have food at these functions anyway?" "Yes, but when you're pregnant you can never have enough food, am I right?" "Sadly, it's true." Adriana sighed, shoveling more eggs into her mouth. She was surprised when her mom stood behind her chair and began playing with her hair. "Oh Mom, you don't have to glam me up." "I'm not, I'm just pinning it up," Astrid said calmly. By the time Adriana finished her breakfast, her hair was pinned back in a bun with a braid twisting through the right side. She felt it gingerly just as the door opened, and her brother emerged. He stopped short, his blue eyes wide. "What?" Adriana asked. "Do I have food on my face?" She wiped her mouth furiously, looking at her reflection in her spoon. No, Finn shook his head. "Anna, you look really pretty." Adriana looked up at her twin in shock. It wasn't often that he complimented her. She found herself trying to fight a smile. "It's just for the ladies of Berk. Nothing special." She saw him shoot their mother a knowing glance, though she wasn't sure why. Suddenly, Finn held out a hand. "You ready?" Blinking, Adriana asked, "For what? Are you taking me to the party?" You could say that Finn's blue eyes were twinkling. Adriana really began to question this entire morning. What were they planning? Sighing in a playful way, she took Finn's hand and followed him out the door. "We're not really going to a baby shower, are we?" Finn and Astrid merely grinned and led her outside. Their mother walked to the barn, strangely bidding them good luck, before mounting Stormfly. "I'm off to the academy, but I'll see you in a few hours." Finn led her down the hill and across the bridge. Adriana's mind was in a whirl as they entered the village and bypassed many houses and stores. Where could he possibly be taking her? Finally, Finn stopped in front of the healers. Adriana frowned, dropping her hand from his arm. "I'm not needed here today." "Well, I certainly hope not," Finn smiled. "I've got a little game for you." "A game?" Adriana raised an eyebrow. "Yup. It's kind of a scavenger hunt, see? Every place we go, you have to find something, and there will be a memory that goes with that thing you find." "K-pitch?" "No. You'll figure it out." Finn leaned against the porch with a casual air and waited. Adriana glanced around. "I'm supposed to find something that gives me a memory?" "Yup." A few girls ambled by, eyeing Finn and giggling. Adriana felt very self-conscious suddenly, even though their laughter probably had nothing to do with her. Finn, however, scowled at them and they scurried away as if burned. "Women." Finn rolled his eyes. "Anna, all you have to do is look around a bit until you find something." "Okay, but why are we doing this?" Adriana asked, trying hard not to get flustered. Why, Finn moaned, his head lolling back against the porch railing. "Oh fine." Adriana sighed. She saw her brother's victorious grin out of the corner of her eye. She walked around the porch, looking for she knew not what, and trying her best not to let a few random teenage girls throw her into a state. They were only checking out her brother, who didn't seem to understand that his casual pose against the porch railing was actually very attractive to girls, but if every girl on the bloody island was watching. Her thoughts halting, Adriana blinked. On the opposite side of the porch from Finn beyond the stairs was a piece of parchment with a familiar drawing. As if in a trance, she walked forward and picked it up. It was the drawing Eric had given her after her kidnapping, his first gift of friendship. Drawn in purple in a child's hand was a clear picture of a girl. She smiled nostalgically at the image. Adriana paused when a second, younger page stuck out from beneath the original. Adriana flipped the old drawing over and blinked in surprise. It was a new sketch of her, recently done. Her hair was down in waves and she was smiling softly. When had Eric learned to draw like this? Hearing footsteps, Adriana turned and stared at Finn. "What is this?" "Read the back." Finn replied. Adriana flipped the sketch and read. Confession 1. When I was 5, I drew a picture for a girl I'd seen but didn't know. She was sad and afraid, and I thought it would be great to draw her a picture in the hopes of making her feel better. Little did I know the adventures we'd have in the years since. You are forever my best friend, Adriana, and I love you. Eric. Confession 1. Adriana asked Finn in a small voice. Finn merely held out his arm and, extremely curious now, Adriana took it. He led her away toward the town square. Adriana decided to stop asking questions. She merely held the confession close to her chest and waited to see where her brother would take her next. She found herself being led inside the bakery. Ben, a stout old Viking with graying hair, grinned at them from behind his bushy mustache. I always love a visit from my favorite twins. You say that to the Thorstons too, Ben? Finn smirked. Ben held a hand to his eyes. Foiled again. Can't pull the wool over your eyes, fearless Finn. Not a chance, Ben. Finn agreed, leaning against the counter and casting a mischievous look at Adriana. However, I think it's time to deliver the package. Package? Adriana echoed. Ben grinned, disappearing behind the counter for a moment. He emerged with a brown paper bag and gently handed it over to Adriana. He patted her hand gingerly before sniffing. Surprised at his emotion, Adriana opened the bag. Inside were 3 of her favorite sweet rolls and a second note. Smiling at the men, she took out the note and read. Confession 2. My father used to co-own this bakery with Ben. I remember the countless hours we'd spend with him baking pies and cookies and throwing handfuls of flour at each other. My dad never complained, and up until the day he died, he encouraged me to always be your friend. I didn't always take his advice. For a while, I was a fool and ignored you. But his death taught me a lesson: treasure those people that you love. We don't know how much time we have. So, from this day forward, I promise to cherish you just as you cherish my father's sweet bun recipe. I love you. Eric. Adriana found herself laughing, despite her wet face. She hadn't realized that she'd started crying. But the memories of Olaf had stirred something deep in her chest. Despite his tragic death, she could still feel him here in this place where flour coated the countertops and laughter was in the air. Reaching out to Ben, she took his flour-coated hand in hers. Thank you. Ben's face was also wet and she saw Finn look away, his face slightly flushed. The old baker patted her hand gently. He was a good man, Olaf. You've got something just as special in his son. Never forget that, dearest. Adriana smiled and nodded, wishing she could reach over the counter to hug him. But before she could charge around the corner, Finn gently grasped her elbow and steered her out the door. He took a deep breath of the crisp September air as if to clear his head and grinned. Next. Finn, what is all this? Adriana asked, holding the 2 cards and bag of sweet buns. Her brother once again merely smiled and continued walking. She resigned herself to being led onward, considering these 2 notes and wondering what else Eric had left her. Where was he anyway? Finn ambled toward the hatchery, careful to open the heavy door and usher her inside so it wouldn't swing shut before she'd fully entered. It had a nasty habit of slamming closed, especially on a windy day. As if on cue, Finn said, Eric would kill me if you got crushed by a door today. As opposed to tomorrow. Adriana smirked. Tease true. Finn leaned against a dragon pen. Well, off you go. What? Adriana wheeled around to face him. This place is huge. I'll never find. Think about what memories you and Eric could have in here, I'm sure you'll think of something. He didn't tell you where it is. I didn't say that, but you're not clueless. It's your shared memories. Yes, but we've been friends for most of our lives. We didn't exactly come in here one time and this is a big building. Better get started then. Finn remarked in a chirpy voice. Adriana sighed in mild annoyance and started forward. Dozens of dragons of varying kinds squawked at her as she walked by, scratching their chins as she went. Finn moseyed a short distance behind, his thick boots scuffing the floor as he walked. She hid a smirk, the big buffoon always dragged his feet when he was bored. Getting antsy? She asked over her shoulder as she walked from pen to pen, trying to think of where this next memory could be. No, I just don't have this card memorized, so if it got eaten by a dragon, I might just botch it on the delivery. Adriana laughed. So much loyalty to the Brotherhood. Eric knew what he was risking. Another quip faltered on her tongue when a certain pen caught her attention. It was smaller than most and allowed for standing room, but there was a built-in bench circumnavigating the inner walls. The pen itself was empty, but the note sitting on the farthest bench was unmistakable. What? Adriana opened the pen and picked up the note. She couldn't help the grin when she saw what it said. Confession 3. When you were 7 and I was 8, a bunch of gronkles had recently hatched. We sat in this pen for hours playing with them, and one of my favorite memories is of you lying on this floor cackling with baby dragons crawling all over you. I couldn't help but think even then that you were absolutely adorable. I love you, Eric. Oh, he's so cute, Adriana gushed, setting the note in the pile. I know, absolutely gushy. Finn rolled his eyes and held open the door. Now where are we going? Adriana asked as soon as they were outside the hatchery. She was surprised, however, to find Tarin standing just outside the door, smiling broadly. Well, I'm going to work, Finn remarked. I couldn't get the entire day off, but Tarin's going to take over. I'll see you in a few hours, okay? Surprising her once again, Finn gave her a swift hug before ambling back into the bustling village. Adriana met Tarin's eyes and together, they laughed. Tarin took Adriana's arm and led her down another street, the latter gushing about the notes. She didn't know what other messages she might find, and again, she wondered where Eric was. This is an exciting day, Tarin remarked as they made their way up the Great Hall stairs. We've been planning this for a while. Really? Adriana asked. Even Finn. Even Finn. He may not act like it, but even he was excited. I think he was looking for a chance to dote on you a little bit because he volunteered to take you around first. Okay, but why? Tarin interrupted. Girlie, you deserve to have a good day. It's been a long, crappy year for you, and gods know you're tired. All of us wanted to do something special for you. Adriana smiled at her shoes, feeling bashful. She'd have to repay Eric, her brother, and Tarin the favor someday, and whoever else might be involved. She followed Tarin through the mighty doors and saw many villagers milling around. The chef and his staff were bustling around the cooking stations as usual. Adriana shivered, not realizing how chilly she'd been outside. The warmth of the great hall extinguished her shivers and warmed her right down to the soles of her boots, and without asking Tarin she began to mosey through the various rows of tables. People gave her bright smiles as she moved past, again making her wonder what they knew that she didn't. She looked around once again for Eric, but the only blondes in the room were herself, Helga Ingerman, who gave her a wild grin, and a waitress. With all these sweet notes he was leaving her, she wasn't sure whether she'd hug or kiss him first. At long last, she found herself in the center of the hall, and there, sitting atop a table, was a fourth folded piece of parchment and a fresh purple lily. Smiling tenderly, she picked up the flower with the other parchments and picked up the fourth confession. Confession 4. My 15th birthday still holds the record as my favorite snuggle together. Do you know why? Because it was right here at this bench that we first kissed after dancing until our feet were sore. Even then you were good at it, and I never forgot how brave and amazing you are. I love you, Eric. Of course Adriana remembered that kiss. Eric had been the first boy she'd ever kissed. He'd been so unsure, but finally when their lips had met, instinct took over and the surrealism of kissing her best friend took over. Even more potent a memory however was the hammering in her chest, the excitement she'd felt. She hadn't just kissed Eric for the sake of a sprig of leaves, even if it had started out that way in their innocent conversation. Perhaps it felt right even then at the humble ages of 13 and 15. It was their first kiss last spring however that really made her knees wobble. Their unexpected outing from the library to Trollbridge, his skittish behavior and trying to leave without talking about his true feelings. It had been obvious to her then just how much he cared and how difficult it was for him to stand by and watch her date another boy. She hadn't wanted him to leave, she wanted to discuss things because in one foul swoop, she'd desperately wanted to fill that hole that had been dug so deeply. She'd wanted to know the truth. Nothing had prepared her for the passionate kiss that he'd given her then, even if they regretted it later. That kiss was second only to their third, best kiss on her front porch, when he'd held her so carefully and kissed her so lovingly. It was both strange and wonderful how Eric could show how much he cared without saying a word. Lost in memories. Adriana blinked in surprise, looking over at Taryn. Oh, yes. Sorry. She laughed a little, adding the paper to the stack. Taryn had a knowing look on her face. He really is perfect for you. Adriana giggled again, unsure what to say. Finally she settled on asking where they were going next. Follow me. Taryn grinned, taking her arm and leading her back out into the chilly September air. They chatted happily as they walked to the outskirts of Burke and into the sawmill. Adriana thought nothing of it until they neared a tall wooden structure, and she froze when she saw the fifth note on the stairs. She stared up at the vast structure, her bright green eyes on the machine that had taken his leg. Horrific images of frayed bone, a large pool of blood, his face whitening under her hands. She already knew what Eric had written without even picking up the paper. At her hesitance, Taryn gingerly picked up the paper and held it out to her. I know what you're thinking, Taryn said quietly. Here. It's sweet. Finding her voice, Adriana asked, you'd read it? He knew you'd hesitate on this one. Adriana took the paper and silently opened it. Confession 5. I don't remember much from the accident that took my leg, but I do remember this, a crippling fear that I'd die without ever begging for your forgiveness, for mending our broken friendship. More than anything, I value our friendship and don't want anything to ever get between us again. I love you. Eric. That is sweet, Adriana commented quietly, folding the paper once again. She swallowed hard. I thought he was going to die that day and I remember thinking the same thing. That he was going to die and I'd never get a chance to tell him how sorry I was. That I still cared about him. Taryn hugged her suddenly and Adriana accepted it happily. In the embrace she could feel all the love and grace that her friend exuded on a constant basis. You are such an encouragement to me, Anna, Taryn said with a watery smile. You've been through so much. Both of you have. I don't know how either of you haven't quit yet. Adriana rubbed her burning eyes. I'm not sure either, to be honest. They both chuckled and waved at their watering eyes frantically, trying to stop each other from crying. Soon they were laughing and leaving the sawmill, Adriana eager to find the next note and hoping that the next location would hold happy memories. She was pleasantly surprised when a certain hill near the village came into view. The sixth note was lying in the middle of the grass and Taryn looked confused as Adriana snorted and began to read it, hoping against all hopes that it said what she thought. Confession 6. I will gladly fall for you for the rest of my days as long as you always laugh like you did here. I love you. Eric. Adriana snorted again, tucking the paper away. She found Taryn looking over her shoulder, looking confused. What happened here? Okay, don't tell him I told you because we agreed never to talk about this. Adriana murmured, glancing around for the first time today hoping that she wouldn't see Eric. It was a few months after he lost his leg. Mara wanted him to go outside more, get some fresh air, and Brandine was busy so I decided to go with him. So we walked up here, talking about whatever, and that's when I became a klutz and slipped on a patch of gravel. Oh dear, Taryn winced. Yes, except I caught my balance by reeling into him. Adriana snickered. It could have been so bad, given his recent injury. He keeled sideways, trying to catch his balance and with all the gravel and trying to fall uphill, arms flailing in all directions. Adriana dissolved into giggles at the mental picture. Wow, Taryn chuckled meekly. It's one of those inside stories. Adriana shrugged. You had to be there. But he made me promise not to tell anyone because he was so mortified. Well, I'm good at keeping secrets. Your story is safe with me. Taryn grinned. And now, onward. They marched down the hill, glad the area had less gravel than it apparently used to. It wouldn't do for Adriana to slip at this point in time. How many of these are left, Taryn? Adriana asked curiously. Oh, a few. The blonde sighed, wishing everyone would stop being so secretive. Looking down into her bag, she pulled out a sweet bun and insisted sharing it with Taryn as they walked. They walked into the village, which teemed with people being almost lunchtime. Many were making the trek up to the Great Hall for lunch. Where's Eric? Adriana asked, looking toward the leather shop. Not in there, sweetness, Taryn said patiently. You will find that it's your next destination though. Oh goody. Adriana bustled inside without knocking, feeling right at home at the leather shop. Horst and Cliff welcomed her with big grins, the latter nearly upending his work desk. She wasn't sure if he was more excited to see her or Taryn. Well, if it isn't my two favorite girls. Cliff wrapped Adriana up in his long arms and gave her a careful squeeze. When he released her, he promptly wrapped an arm around Taryn's waist. Your next note is over there somewhere, and no, I do not know what it says. He made me swear not to read it, despite my almost constant temptation, and... Adriana picked the note off his desk and opened it, Cliff's voice disappearing into the background as she began to read. Confession 7. It was here I discovered two things, how innovative you are in a workshop and also what an amazing kisser you really are. Even after almost 13 years of friendship, you never cease to amaze me. Keep surprising me, Annie. I love you. Eric. Her face flushing slightly, Adriana kept her back turned on the three people behind her, glad to hear Cliff still engaging them in conversation. She didn't want them asking questions if she turned around with a red face. Cliff would never let them hear the end of it if he knew that she'd nearly kissed Eric senseless in this very room about a month ago. When she deemed her coloring back to normal, she added the note to the ever-growing pile and faced them. Cliff instantly asked, what did it say? Cliffy, I wouldn't want to scar you. She replied seamlessly. Where to next, Taryn? Scar me. Cliff pouted. As a matter of fact, I've fulfilled my duties, Taryn smiled, patting Cliff's chest. You get Cliffy for the next two. Oh. Adriana smiled up at him. And where are we going? I'll tell you if you tell me what the note said. No. Or man. Cliff waved her forward and opened the door. Fine, fine, but I'll find out soon enough. I don't know about that, Cliff, Adriana replied, shooting a knowing look at Taryn. Every couple has its secrets. Taryn blushed and Adriana laughed as she stepped outside, beginning to wonder what secrets Cliff and Taryn might be keeping between them. She thought it might be too soon for them to have kissed already, it hadn't been that long. Blast that accursed temptress, curiosity. Cliff exclaimed, recognizing the apparent look on her face. Alas, we all must keep a zipped lip on those secrets. What secrets do you really have to hide, Cliff? Adriana asked teasingly. You get so excited with everything that happens, you can't wait to tell everyone what happened. Cliff tapped the side of his nose. Aha, but that's where the curly hair comes in. Curly hair? Adriana blinked. Yup. Curly hair makes it easier to keep secrets. Cliff slid an arm around her shoulders and leaned in close. That's why girls put braids in, to fool their hair into thinking it's curly so they can keep secrets better. Adriana laughed. Your children are going to have the craziest imaginations someday. That seemed to shut him up. Cliff's face turned a blotchy red and he plowed forward, obviously feeling awkward. Adriana giggled and caught up to him, taking his arm as they walked. The walk to the next destination took a little longer. Cliff made sure to walk at a somewhat leisurely pace, given his stature compared to hers. He nearly dwarfed her in size and could usually outdistance her easily. Here it was obvious to Adriana that Cliff didn't want to leave her in the dust. She was grateful for it when, after her second walk up the great hall stairs, she didn't feel winded. Instead of going inside the massive hall, however, Cliff steered her down another path that led to the back section of the hall. She smiled knowingly when Cliff opened the door to the library and ushered her inside. Adriana stared around at the countless shelves. She and Eric had spent countless hours in here as children, their shenanigans and silly games were innumerous. How in the world was she supposed to find a note in here? Cliff tossed a hand toward the shelves. Off you go, then. With a giggle, Adriana set off up and down the shelves. She scrounged through various favorite books she and Eric had grown up loving but came up empty. Matilda gave her an excited, knowing grin from her desk but said nothing as Adriana passed. Up and down the rows she thought of her most potent memories, sometimes darting off to another shelf as fast as her pregnancy legs could take her. But alas, she came up empty-handed. Hands on her hips, she swiveled toward Cliff and Matilda. All right, give me a hint. It's in a book. Yes, thank you, Cliffy, I gathered that much. Matilda turned in her seat. Think plants. Plants. Adriana mused, striding toward the herbology section. She riffled through the books in search of some kind of clue. On occasion she'd find Fish Legs and his son, Gunnar, in here researching various plants. Scanning the books down a particularly filled-up row, Adriana's finger drifted from binding to binding until a pink book caught her eye. Curious, she pulled it out and found the corner of a familiar-looking note sticking out of a page in the middle. The book cover read Crafts for Beginners. Adriana opened the page and paused in surprise at what she found. The chapter was on creating fabric flowers from home. A purple fabric flower marked the page just under the note. Intricate pink embroidery surrounded the edges of the petals, and the center was cinched by a cluster of pink pearls. Awestruck, Adriana picked it up with care, almost afraid it would break. Pulling out the note, she read. Confession 8. You've worn flowers in your hair for as long as I can remember. The most important men in your lives knew how to make them, your father and Benin. I think it's high time I knew how to make them too. I know how much you miss him. You don't talk about it for Finn's sake, but I know you miss him just as much. I know you would have wanted him to be a part of your future if he'd only had time. So I made this flower in his honor and embroidered his name along the petals so you always have something to remember him by. I love you. Eric. Adriana never would have expected this. Some might think it's so simple, but it wasn't about the fabric flowers. It was Eric's constant thoughtfulness and consideration that fabric flowers were something she'd grown up with and she still treasured. It was true, the fabric flowers reminded her of her innocent childhood before tragedy had struck, and they reminded her of Benin. She looked closer at the petals and found that the intricate embroidery around the petals indeed was Benin's name in cursive. Eric must have spent a considerable amount of time on this. Adriana looked up when she heard soft footfalls. Cliff and Matilda were giving her gentle smiles. Matilda gently took the flower and pinned it into her hair, Adriana laughing softly and wiping her face. She hadn't realized she'd even started crying. Again. Stupid hormones. Adriana cried, waving at her face. Cliff and Matilda laughed, the latter giving her a warm hug. I love you, dear. The dark-haired woman pulled back, her eyes alight with joy. I don't know if I've ever told you that. It has been an absolute joy spending all these years with you. Now if you ever need help with the baby, be sure to call. Don't forget about me now. Adriana laughed. Impossible, Matilda. She hugged her friend again. Cliff cleared his throat. Not that I want to break up this touching moment, but I really don't feel like crying today. At least not yet. Yet? Adriana asked. Matilda promptly frog-marched them toward the doors. Now you've got more memories to find, so best not dilly-dally. We're right on schedule. Schedule? Adriana asked as she stepped back outside. Out of the corner of her eye she caught Cliff slicing a hand under his chin at Matilda. Oh, gasped the wide-eyed Matilda. Adriana turned a curious eye toward Cliff. What's going on? Do you hear that? Cliff suddenly exclaimed. The females paused, listening hard. Only the sound of birds and terrible terrors filled the air. Adventure calls. Cliff cheered to the treetops, brandishing a stick. Adriana laughed out loud as he grabbed her hand and promptly began charging down the path back toward the village. Bye, Matilda. Adriana called over her shoulder, still laughing. Goodbye, dear. They slowed their pace when they finally reached the Great Hall, Cliff ushering her across the stone platform toward the other side of the woods. You know I can still badger you with questions, Cliff. Adriana teased. Best not spoil the surprise. Cliff halted, mid-step. That is, if there were any surprises to spoil. Cliff, what is going on? Adriana demanded, halting on the dirt path through the trees. Eric leaving me all these notes and gifts, everyone being so nice to me, what's? Oh look, a note. Cliff exclaimed, running off through the trees. Adriana huffed and followed after him, knowing full well that he was avoiding her questions. Sure enough, he plucked a note off a familiar fallen tree trunk and handed it out to her. She stared at the trunk and the note in his hand. Cliff winced. He said you would recognize this one. Treading softly, Adriana took the note. She pretended to give an annoyed sigh. I really don't want to cry again. Then don't. Cliff grinned. Turn off the waterworks, girlie. Easy for you to say, boyo. Adriana snicked before finally opening the 9th note, hoping Cliff didn't notice her trembling fingers. Confession 9. Annie, I will never be able to fathom the amount of pain you've experienced. It kills me every day knowing that I couldn't help you, that I didn't know. But it was here that you trusted me and told me that you were pregnant, and I didn't know what to think or feel. I've made my decision since then. More than anything, I want to be your support and helper. I will be there when you have this baby and I will be there to help you raise him or her. I don't know the first thing about parenting, but I know this, I love you, Annie, and I will do whatever it takes to make sure you and your baby are loved and cared for. One day at a time, we will handle this trial just like we have all the others, and I will be standing right next to you as we do. I promise. I love you. Eric. A bundle of tissues was being held out to her when she lifted her eyes. Chuckling with Cliff, Adriana took them and wiped her face. Even as she dabbed her eyes, she found herself encircled in her friend's long arms. I love you, Annabelle. Cliff murmured into her hair. Adriana sniffed and held him tighter around his skinny shoulders. I love you too, Cliffy. Cliff, would you stop making my daughter cry? Adriana pulled away in surprise, looking over her shoulder to see her dad walking toward them through the trees. She laughed and rubbed at her eyes a final time, Cliff rubbing her back gently. Sorry, Chief, but that's Eric's fault. No, it's fine, Adriana sighed. Happy tears. Well, they're only about to get better. Hiccup smiled at her fondly. Or is it worse? Cliff asked brightly. Adriana sighed. Why? Hiccup held out his hand and, playfully sighing once again, Adriana took it and followed him deeper into the woods. Cliff bade them a cheerful goodbye before tramping through the woods back toward the Great Hall as fast as his long legs could take him. The Haddocks took a turn around a bend when they heard a loud crash, followed by a loud exclamation, I'm okay. Gods, he's so clumsy. Adriana whispered comically. Hiccup grinned. That he is. Dad, did you see all this? Adriana held up the handful of notes. Catching his knowing grin, she exclaimed, you knew. Oh Addie, of course I knew. I know everything, at least where you and Finn are concerned. Everything. Adriana winced, wondering if he'd seen confession number 7. Hiccup chortled. Mostly. They took another turn and Adriana's pace slowed, the path looking more and more familiar. Wait. She looked up at Hiccup unsurely, but he merely tugged her forward. Also, Hiccup said, looking down at her. You look beautiful, Addie. Adriana looked away bashfully, not sure what to say. Everyone has been way too nice to me today. It's almost like it's my birthday again. My last birthday wasn't the greatest. I'd say today will beat any birthday you've ever had. Impossible. Adriana grinned. No birthday is better than our 8th, when you and Mom threw that huge party in the Great Hall and you did face painting. Close second, Hiccup quipped. Finn asked for Tornado and I got Stormfly. Adriana grinned. We looked like big-eyed bugs, but it was still fun. Adriana paused, looking down at the ground in surprise. Flower petals covered the dirt path ahead of them. She looked up at Hiccup with an unsure eye, her heart beginning to pound. Dad. Hiccup looked down at her then, and she realized he'd been avoiding eye contact before. Now she could see why, his green eyes were misty. Dad. Adriana asked again when he only stood there, taking her in. Swallowing hard, Hiccup took a note out of his pocket. She knew it was the 10th confession, but she only stared up at her dad, her hero, the strongest man in the world. Addie, Hiccup murmured. I want you to know something. Adriana stared up at him, waiting. I am so proud of you. Hiccup's eyes swam again, but his voice didn't crack as he continued, you've been through so much. Too much. And you've never quit. Never given up hope. I just want you to know that your mom and I could not have been blessed with a better daughter. Hiccup leaned down, kissed her forehead and hugged her close to his chest. Adriana held him close, a few tears slipping down her face. She almost felt like someone was dying, like he was saying goodbye. Too soon, he released her, his freckled face splotchy but loving, proud, joyful. Open your note, sweetie. Adriana's fingers fumbled with the edges for a moment before she managed to open it. Confession 10. You will find my last confession at our own personal getaway. Follow the petals. I love you. Eric. Adriana looked down, seeing the red, pink and yellow petals curving around the corner of the well-worn path she'd tread for so long as a child. Her heart pounded in her chest, understanding coming to her, something that hadn't occurred to her before now. She looked up at her dad, who had only eyes for her. Aren't you coming? A corner of Hiccup's mouth lifted and he brushed a few stray hairs back from her face. You won't want me there. I'll always want you there, Adriana said quietly. And I will be for as long as I'm able, Hiccup smiled. But there comes a time when a dad has to give his little girl to a better man. Adriana's heart thundered, staring back down the path. She had an idea what was waiting for her, but she wanted to know where her childhood had gone. While she couldn't believe the twists and turns her life had taken, though she knew how much she truly loved Eric, she wasn't ready. I don't want to leave you, Adriana whispered, her voice a squeak in the quiet woods. Hiccup laughed, holding the sides of her face and pressing his forehead to hers. Addie, you will never leave me. Never. I'll always be right here when you need me. But things will be different. Yes, it will be different. But that's the beauty of it, Addie. Hiccup said quietly. You can start a new adventure. You. Adriana felt almost silly, asking all these questions, but she felt like she had to or she'd regret it. She wanted more time with him. Just him. You really want me to though? Honestly. Hiccup's eyes were bright. Addie, I want nothing better for you than to be happy. Fulfilled. Treasured. I've done my absolute best to give you those things. I'd never let you go again if I thought he wasn't capable of doing that for you. There's no other man I would entrust my only little girl and her baby to. A matching set of green eyes stared at each other. Adriana felt her heart lift at the memories, both good and bad. The things she'd said to make him laugh or cry, the things he'd done despite his busy schedule, going out of his way to make her day. Since the very first day of her life, he'd held her, protected her, saved her. He'd never been perfect, but he never needed to be. He was still the strongest man in the world. He'd do anything for her without thought of himself. And if letting her go for someone better meant her happiness, so be it. She wished her Poppy could have been here today. She wished Benin could have given her one of his warm, gentle hugs and given his blessing. She couldn't have them, but she was ultimately thankful that she had her father, her first best friend here with her today, to patiently answer her silly questions, to boost her confidence, to make her happy. I love you, Daddy. Adriana said softly. I love you so much. Hiccup's eyes watered and he came so close to crying at last. Kissing her forehead firmly, he straightened and gave her a loving smile. I love you too, Addie. Finally, he nodded toward the trail of flower petals. Go on. He's waiting for you. Adriana gazed toward the path she knew so well. She glanced back at her dad again, only finding an encouraging smile on his face. No regrets. No second thoughts. She grinned back, and with a deep breath, she strode down the path toward her new adventure. Heartbreaking, he watched his baby girl go. Even as his eyes burned with unshed tears, his heart swelled with pride. How beautiful and strong she was, how creative and snooky and entertaining she could be. She was his heart and soul, the only thing that kept him going every day except for his wife, dragon and son. He'd faced countless difficult situations in his life. Hordes of memories flashed across his mind's eye, from battling the Red Death to discovering his father's untimely death to dueling dagger for his children. So many painful memories. But letting her go had to be the hardest thing he'd ever done in his life. But he was proud and thankful that he could have this moment with her. That Eric valued her relationship with her father, that he thought to give them this last moment together. So Hiccup did not call her name as she walked away from him. He did not regret a moment he'd shared with her. He only smiled and prayed her coming adventure would be even sweeter than the one she left behind. When Adriana approached the final turn before Troll's Bridge came into view, she paused, if only to calm her nerves and take a deep breath. She wasn't sure what exactly to expect or why she was so nervous. Was it normal to be so nervous at a time such as this? After another moment of nervous flutters in her stomach that had nothing to do with the baby, she swallowed the nerves and walked around the bend. She very nearly stopped in her tracks again when she saw him. Eric was standing on Troll Bridge, smiling widely at her. She could see his dimples even from this distance. For some reason, everything about him seemed different. Maybe it was the new blue shirt with the brown pants, or his wavy hair, or bright teal eyes. Maybe it was the way his prosthetic glinted in the sun as if recently polished. But she couldn't deny that he took her breath away right there. Her face split into a smile so wide at his own grin, and as she walked toward him she looked away bashfully. She'd never been bashful toward him. That was when she noticed the flowers gathered all around Troll Bridge, and how clean the area looked, as if it had been recently raked and weeded, dead logs and branches cleared away. It was as if he'd organized a complete operation right under her nose. When had he had time for all this? How did he keep it a secret when so many people had been involved? How long had he been planning this? Adriana finally stood in front of him and couldn't help the grin. He was still grinning down at her like nothing else could make him happier. Without warning, she threw her arms around his neck. Eric laughed and hugged her back. Right on schedule, milady. What do you? How long have you? How? Adriana demanding as she pulling away, holding the stack of notes between them. He laughed, kissing her forehead chastely. Anything for my girl. You're amazing, Adriana breathed, looking down at the stack of notes. She knew exactly the place she was going to put them for safekeeping. Well, Eric's grin faltered, as if suddenly nervous. We're not finished yet. And with that, he took a step back before bending down on one knee. Adriana gasped, a hand flying to her mouth even though deep down she knew this was happening. All her friends and family being involved, all the sweet notes and favorite memories, it all had to lead towards something extra special. She vaguely wondered in the back of her mind if he shouldn't be bending and putting all his weight on his bad knee, but knew what he'd say to that. He was going to do this right, and all the pain in the world would be completely worth it. From his pocket, he withdrew a black velvet box. Holding it up to her, Eric revealed a small silver ring with a purple flower on the top. The silver band had a couple loops to surround and keep the flower in place. The purple diamond itself had been cut into quarters and made to look exactly like a lily. Adriana stared down at the ring in shock. Where had he acquired something so beautiful and intricately made? Annie, Eric said softly. Her eyes instantly began to burn and she brushed her fingers under them, trying to stop them from spilling over. You have been my best friend for as long as I can remember, Eric said, looking up at her with nothing but love in his eyes. We've had many ups and downs. People have become between us and we've both experienced loss. His voice caught for only a moment and he quickly swallowed. In many ways. But no matter how hard it's been, you've always been there for me. No matter how much I couldn't stand living, now I can't believe how far gone I was, and it's only because of you and your family that I'm still here. You've never given up on me. Eric wet his lips before continuing, but even more amazing is how you've never given up. I don't know how you do it, but you do. You get up every single day with a smile on your face. Adriana admitted a laugh, despite her wet cheeks. Most days. Most days, Eric conceded with a nervous laugh of his own. You've been beaten down so much and you haven't faltered. And now? He glanced down at her protruding belly for a moment before gazing back up at her. Now you're going through the hardest thing I think any of us could think of. And I know I've told you this before, but I'll tell you again, I don't know what I'm doing. But I do know you, and